Hey guys, tonight we slip quietly into a world where dawn hasn't even decided whether it wants to exist yet. You're wrapped in scratchy wool, half asleep, half shivering, and fully aware that the medieval village around you is already breathing. Timid little sounds in the dark. The creak of a thatched roof settling. A rooster who's clearly confused about his shift schedule. You won't believe this, but in a place like this, the day begins before light does. Sleep is something you borrow, not something you own. All right, before you get too cozy, go ahead and smash that like button and subscribe, but only if your heart says yes. And as always, tell me where you're listening from and what time it is over there. I love seeing our sleepy little map of the world grow. Dim the lights, get that fan going for some background vibes, and let's chill into tonight's little adventure. You lie on your narrow, straw-stuffed mattress, staring at a ceiling so close you could touch it if you stretched. Dust drifts down in the faint glow of an ember that refuses to die in the hearth. The air smells faintly of smoke, wool, and yesterday's porridge bowl that someone definitely forgot to rinse. The cottage is tiny, and sound carries easily. You hear a sleepy grunt from someone curled up beside you, another rustle from a bundle of blankets across the room, and the soft shifting of a chicken settling on a beam overhead. Yes, people really kept animals indoors at night. Warmth was too precious to waste. You ease yourself upright, careful not to wake anyone. Cold air bites your cheeks instantly. Homes like this rarely hold warmth through the night. Thick walls of wattle and daub do their best, but when you wake before sunrise, you feel every bit of winter lingering in the cracks. You rub your hands together and step toward the hearth, where a faint red glow hides under a pale layer of ash. There's a strange comfort in this moment, quiet, empty. You move with purpose but without rush. You reach for the fire hook and stir the embers, just like countless villagers did each morning in the centuries before you. The ash lifts, embers brighten, and a tiny thread of warmth brushes your knuckles. A small relief, considering that medieval English dawns were chilly even in summer. A tiny bundle of kindling waits nearby, and you feed the fire with it, coaxing the flame with careful breaths. Sparks jump like tiny fireflies, one of those everyday miracles nobody bothers to celebrate. Around you, the cottage changes shape as the fire grows. Clay pots emerge from the dark, outlines of wooden stools tilt into view, and a battered kettle catches the first glimmer of orange. Someone once carved a little pattern into the stool's legs. Someone else mended a crack in the kettle's spout with soft metal. A home like this carries the fingerprint of every hand that has ever lived here. Outside, a lonely cartwheel groans as the wind nudges it. A dog barks once, half-hearted. From a neighbouring cottage you hear someone cough, the dry, exhausted cough people tended to develop when homes filled with smoke overnight. Chimneys existed, but not on every house. Some simply had roof holes, which didn't always cooperate. Your eyes still sting from the remnants of the night smoke. You stand, stretching your arms, feeling the stiffness of someone who slept lightly. Most medieval villagers did, not by choice, but by practice. You slept in intervals, early sleep, waking, sometimes talking quietly or tending to minor tasks, then a second sleep toward dawn. The rhythm feels strange by modern standards, but to you, standing barefoot on cold, packed earth, it feels natural, a faint stir behind you. Someone shifts, the blanket rustling. The village is beginning its slow, reluctant awakening. Not hurried, not loud, more like a tide creeping in. You can almost sense the moment the day starts, even before the sun acknowledges it. A rooster crows, late for once. Even he overslept. You glance at the tiny window shuttered against the darkness. There's no sky yet. only a promise of it, and you breathe in, gathering yourself for the day ahead, knowing this first quiet moment might be the gentlest one you'll get until night. You stand in the dim orange glow, letting your eyes adjust while the fire begins its slow reclaiming of the room. It's just enough light to see the uneven floor, the clay mugs lined up on a shelf, and the rough wool cloak draped over a peg that someone hung there last night with sleepy hands. You pull the cloak toward you, wrapping it tight. The chill still slips underneath, but at least you feel like you're wearing a thin reminder of warmth. The cottage murmurs awake around you, a soft thump from the loft above. Someone must be turning in their sleep. Then a familiar sound. A wooden ladle falls from somewhere, landing with a clatter that seems far too loud for this hour. You wince and glance at the sleeping bundle across the room. They don't stir. They're used to noise. Medieval homes were never quiet, even at night. You step outside, lifting the latch gently, and a fresh wave of cold air wraps around you. The sky is a deep, endless blue, almost black, but not quite. You can feel dawn somewhere behind the horizon pressing upward. In front of you, the village lies still like someone froze it mid-motion. Thatched roofs are faint silhouettes against the fading night. Smoke seeps lazily from a few chimneys, thin and unsure. A dog sniffs the ground lazily, not yet ready to bark at anything that moves. You inhale the smell of damp earth and frost. It's sharp, but strangely refreshing. The fields beyond the cottages are muted shapes, resting under the last breath of night. You can hear something faint, maybe a bucket swinging, maybe a door creaking open on someone else's cottage. Villagers rise early, but rarely at the same moment. It creates this scattered mosaic of waking noises, never enough to dominate, always enough to remind you that you're part of a living whole. As you stand there, you think of the tasks that your hands will meet today. You haven't stepped into them yet, but the weight of them is already familiar. Medieval life didn't allow many surprises at dawn. You always knew the day would require your whole body before it even began. Behind you, the cottage rustles again. Someone lights their own fire. You hear the sizzle of a spark catching hay. It reminds you of that little fact you once heard. Villagers often saved glowing embers in covered pots overnight so they didn't have to restart a fire from nothing. An especially helpful trick in months when damp wood could refuse to burn for hours. Households sometimes even shared embers with neighbours, passing the beginnings of a flame from cottage to cottage like a quiet morning gift. Your fingers brush the latch as you close the door softly and return inside. The warmth has grown a little, enough to soften the air. You move through the home slowly, listening, adjusting to the rhythm of everyone waking at their own pace. Someone mumbles a greeting, half coherent. The sleeping bundle shifts and sits up, hair messy, face puffy from sleep. They stretch, joints cracking audibly. The floor creaks with each of your steps. The first words of the day aren't a conversation. They're more like sounds of recognition, of bodies reminding each other they exist. Medieval mornings weren't full of chatter. Energy was saved for what mattered later. You take your place by the small table, tracing your fingers along its scarred surface. The grooves tell the story of every loaf cut, every tool repaired, every moment someone leaned too hard while trying not to fall asleep. You brush aside a small brass token, a leftover from yesterday's errands, that someone must have placed there without thinking. It clinks against the wood, brighter than the room deserves at this hour. Then you hear it, the village's first real signal that morning has begun. A far-off clang, metal against metal. Someone sharpening a blade or banging a pot into shape. It echoes faintly across the cottages and you feel it in your chest. The day is no longer waiting. It has arrived. You adjust your cloak, pull a stool closer to the fire and sit for just a moment longer, letting your thoughts settle. This is the last pause before everything begins, the final breath of stillness before the machinery of village life sweeps you into its rhythm. And as the first thin streak of pale grey leaks across the tiny window, you give yourself over to the day. The faint grey at the window sharpens, just enough to outline the wooden latch and the uneven shutter planks. The cottage is stirring fully now. Sleepy faces, tangled hair, stiff movements as everyone adjusts to the cold that clings like a second skin. There's no luxury of easing into comfort. The morning demands participation. You stand, roll your shoulders, and step toward the door again, knowing the first tasks of the day are waiting just outside. You push the door open, and a mild breeze nudges the cloak around your legs. The village feels different now, still quiet but with intention. A few figures emerge from their own cottages, shapes wrapped in wool and linen. Someone drags a wooden bucket, its bottom scraping against loose stones. Another person moves toward the well, carrying a rope coiled around their shoulder. Each movement feels deliberate, not rushed but not idle either. Medieval villagers didn't wander in the mornings. They navigated, guided by habit and necessity. You pick up your own bucket, its handle worn smooth by years of hands gripping the same curve. The well stands at the centre of the village, a squat stone circle with a wooden crossbeam above it. The rope is already slightly damp, telling you someone must have drawn water just a little earlier. You join the slow procession of neighbours heading there, offering a nod rather than a greeting. Mornings weren't the time for friendly chatter. People saved their breath for work. The sound of the wooden pulley turning is almost comforting. Someone ahead of you is already hauling up a heavy bucket, arms trembling from the weight. You wait your turn, planting your feet on the cool earth. When the rope is passed to you, you let it slip through your fingers, feeling the coarse fibres, and then begin the steady descent. The rope sways, then tightens, then relaxes again as the bucket sinks into the water far below. A muted splash rises from the pit, echoing in the stone throat of the well. Pulling it up is real work. Shoulders strain, breath grows heavier, and you can feel your grip slipping just a bit as droplets run down your wrists. By the time the bucket breaks the surface, catching a small shimmer of dawn light, your arms feel like they've done a full hour's labour. But this, hauling water, fetching it before anything else, was the non-negotiable beginning of many medieval days. Without water, there's no cooking, no cleaning, no feeding animals, no quenching thirst. A whole household's rhythm lives or dies on this humble task. As you turn back toward your cottage, a thin curl of smoke rises from a nearby roof, drifting lazily across the awakening village. A dog trots by, nose close to the ground, tail cutting a slow arc behind it. Someone else passes you carrying a bundle of kindling, and another brings out a stack of tools to check for damage. A man kneels by a fence, poking at the weak spots with a dull knife. These small jobs scattered across the village remind you of something practical. Medieval roofs, fences and tools needed constant attention. Everyday tasks weren't chores, they were maintenance of survival. You set the water inside the cottage, feeling the coolness seep into your skin. The fire crackles now, growing stronger. Someone sits near it, warming their hands, while another person begins grinding a few grains, barely enough for a small morning meal. The house feels more alive, though not exactly cheerful. People weren't grumpy in the modern sense. They were simply conserving energy, saving words for moments that mattered. As you step back outside, you notice another figure near a small patch of herbs behind your cottage. They're checking the plants with careful fingers, even though the sun hasn't fully risen. Herbs were precious, medicine, seasoning, and sometimes currency when bartering. You glance at them for a moment, realizing how many little tasks keep a medieval household afloat. Nothing is small, nothing is optional. In the soft morning chill, the village fully awakens, not with noise but with purpose, and you feel yourself pulled into that early rhythm, ready to take on whatever the rest of the morning demands. You lift the bucket again, feeling the water sway inside it, cold and heavy. You brace your elbow against your hip and carry it toward the side of the cottage, where the day's first chores wait. The sunlight is still too faint to warm anything, but it casts a soft sheen across the village path, just enough to reveal footprints left by those who woke earlier than you. There's always someone who starts before everyone else, either by choice or because sleep fled faster than it arrived. You set the bucket down beside a small wooden trough and pour carefully. The water splashes against the sides, the sound sharp in the stillness. One of the hens perched on the fence hops down immediately, pecking at droplets on the rim. You shoo her away gently. She'll get her turn soon enough. Birds had a habit of inserting themselves into morning tasks like they were senior supervisors. As you straighten, you notice the faint smell of damp hay mixing with wood smoke drifting from a dozen leaning chimneys. Nearby, a neighbour's door creaks open, and an elderly man steps out, leaning on a walking stick smoother than river stone. He nods to you, one of those slow, heavy nods that carries a world of unspoken understanding. Older villagers usually woke early, partly because of aching joints, partly because they understood the village's rhythm better than anyone else. They often checked small things out of habit: fences, gates, the frost on the ground, the shape of the clouds hinting what kind of weather the day might deliver. You turn back to your own tasks. A pile of firewood needs sorting, and some sticks are still too damp from last night's fog to use. You pick through them, tapping each lightly against the chopping block. A hollow sound means it might burn. A dull thud means it will only smoke your house into misery. It's a delicate kind of knowledge, learned slowly, the way your hands instinctively know which stick is trustworthy. In medieval villages, a surprising amount of survival came down to tiny judgments like that. Behind the cottage you hear a faint rustling. When you step around the corner you find the goat already nudging the gate, eager for food or attention or both. She stares at you with a face that's far too expressive for someone who hasn't paid taxes in her life. You grab a handful of leftover scraps, yesterday's cabbage stalks, a bit of hay, and place them into a trough. She digs in immediately, tail flicking happily. Goats were valuable. Milk, occasional meat, hides, and even their droppings had practical uses in certain crafts. You stroke her head once before stepping away. A few cottages down, someone calls out, sharp but not angry. You listen for a moment. It's the village miller, muttering about a stuck door on his grain shed. He always mutters, especially in the morning. Millers had a reputation in some villages, part essential worker, part local rumour magnet. Some people claim they kept too much grain for themselves. Others said they knew everyone's secrets because villagers whispered complaints while waiting in line. Whether fair or not, the character of the miller was one of those recurring figures in daily life that shaped the village's social weather. Your own tasks pull you back again. You check the cottage's outer wall, where a small crack formed during last week's rain. You run your fingers along the edge, feeling how the clay has dried unevenly. It'll need patching later with a mix of straw and mud. You make a mental note. Morning is about noticing things. Tiny damages, missing items, tools someone borrowed and forgot to return. Medieval life didn't allow neglect to linger long. Inside the house you hear movement growing steadier, louder, the unmistakable sound of people officially awake, not just drifting between dreams and chores. The fire pops and crackles. Someone drops a wooden spoon. Someone else coughs, long and low. It's starting. Then, from somewhere across the village, a bell rings. A small handbell, not a church tower. Perhaps a shepherd signalling family members. Perhaps someone calling others to help with a stubborn animal. Bells served many purposes, and this one carries a particular pitch you've learned to recognise. It's the sound of the village's day, finally, firmly beginning. You take one long breath, the cold settling deep into your lungs. Your hands already ache a little from simple tasks, but there's comfort in that ache. It signals the transition from quiet chores to the larger demands waiting beyond the cottages. Your morning has begun, and the village moves with you. The cottage is warm enough now that you can see your breath only faintly. The fire snaps with a bright, eager crackle as you set a small iron pot over the revived flames. Breakfast is never a grand affair in a medieval village, but it's important. Fuel for the body before the long grind outside. You kneel beside the hearth and stir the embers a little more, watching them pulse with orange life. The smell of smoke wraps around you, not unpleasant, just familiar. The kind of scent that clings to every garment and every woven blanket in the house. You reach for the grain sack tucked into the corner, its mouth tied loosely with twine. When you scoop your hand inside, you can feel how coarse the contents are. Barely sifted barley meal, rough enough to scrape your palm. Fine flour is a luxury you rarely see. This stuff is closer to the earth it came from, bits of husk and all. You pour a small handful into the pot along with water from the bucket you hauled earlier. The mixture thickens slowly as you stir it with a wooden spoon worn down to a smooth curved edge. Someone behind you yawns so loudly it sounds like a creaking door. You don't turn, you just toss a smile over your shoulder. That first, exaggerated groan of the morning feels like a shared ritual. Medieval families didn't wake neatly or gracefully. Everyone emerged from sleep with stiff joints and tangled hair, and there was always one person whose morning noises could have passed for a dying ox. This morning you realise that person is not you. Yet. A child-sized bundle of blankets rolls over in the corner, revealing a sleepy face squinting at the fire. They rub their eyes, sniff once, and shuffle toward the heat with tiny, determined steps. The fire pulls everyone in during the early hours. Warmth is a precious currency. You edge closer to let them stand beside you, their small shoulder leaning gently against your arm. The porridge bubbles lazily as steam begins to rise, filling the room with a warm, grainy scent. It's not exciting, but at this hour it feels like comfort in its simplest form. You sprinkle in a pinch of crushed herbs, nothing extravagant, just a little something saved from last autumn, to give the porridge a whisper of flavour. Once in a blue moon, you might get a splash of milk if the animals are generous. This morning, no such luck. While the meal thickens, you look around the cottage, watching everyone settle into their roles without speaking much. Someone fetches wooden bowls from a shelf. Another checks the fire, poking a stubborn log into a better angle. Someone else folds blankets and tucks them into a corner to clear space. Medieval mornings were never idle. Even the quiet moments had purpose. A neighbour's voice drifts in through the open door, two people exchanging a brief greeting about the weather. You catch a snippet of their conversation, something about frost on the far fields, something about whether today will warm enough for comfortable work. Weather isn't small talk here. Weather decides everything. A cold morning can mean a slow-growing crop or a sick animal or a ruined patch of herbs. Villagers track patterns instinctively, almost like people today check the news. As you stir the pot a final time, you remember a tiny quirk you once heard from someone older. Some medieval households dropped a pebble into their porridge pot to keep it from sticking to the bottom. The stone scraped the base as the mixture bubbled, preventing burning. You glance around as if expecting someone to mock the idea, but no one would. Tricks like that were treasured. passed quietly through generations, tiny hacks that kept meals edible and life manageable. You scoop the steaming porridge into bowls, careful not to spill. The heat warms your fingers even through the wood. Everyone gathers around the small table, pulling stools close, sitting shoulder to shoulder. The room fills with soft sounds, spoons clinking, quiet breaths, the occasional appreciative sigh for the warmth alone. Breakfast wasn't meant to delight. It was meant to steady you before labour stole the softness from your hands and the warmth from your bones. The meal is plain, but it feels grounding. The heat calms the cold still tucked in your chest. And while the sun hasn't yet cleared the horizon, you can feel the promise of light beginning to stretch across the village. For now, you simply eat, breathe, and enjoy the warmth while it lasts. You linger over the last spoonful of porridge, letting the warmth settle into your stomach before the real demands of the day claim you. The fire glows steadily now, casting shifting shadows on the walls, shadows of people you've shared this small space with for as long as you can remember. Breakfast isn't a moment of leisure, it's a moment of alignment, a way for everyone to gather strength before stepping into the cold, the mud, or the endless small burdens that make up a medieval morning. As bowls empty, you stand and begin rinsing them with the water left in the bucket. There's no soap, of course, just cold water and a bit of clean straw to scrub the rough wood. The residue of porridge comes off easily, leaving the bowls faintly warm from their recent meal. You set them on the table to dry, knowing they'll be used again within hours. Medieval kitchens had no drawer full of extras, just a few precious items, each carrying years of history. Behind you, someone adjusts the fire, nudging a log that's burning too quickly. The hearth had to be managed constantly. One careless morning could mean a cold afternoon. In wealthier homes, fire dogs and andirons controlled airflow, but in cottages like yours, everything depends on well-placed wood and careful attention. You watch the flames rise and fall as someone pokes at the embers with practiced precision. A draught sneaks in from under the door, stirring a strip of dried herbs hanging from the rafters. They rattle softly, releasing a faint hint of rosemary. Bundles like these weren't just for cooking. They hung as insect deterrents, mild air fresheners, and even as folk charms against illness. Medieval life often blurred the line between practicality and belief, without anyone finding it strange. You touch the herbs lightly as you pass, enjoying the little burst of their scent. Someone else brings a small jug to the table, thin clay, patched once with a strip of heated resin. They pour a bit of yesterday's leftover ale, watered down just enough to make it safe for even the youngest to sip. Water was often unreliable for drinking, but a little ale, especially the weak kind made at home, was part of everyday life. Not enough to make anyone stumble, just enough to cut through the morning dryness in your throat. You take a sip, feeling the faint tang settle on your tongue. The village outside is gaining voice now. Footsteps crunch across frost. A door slams, too hard, probably by accident. Someone shouts a greeting from half a street away. The sound of a sheep bleating rumbles through the cold air, joined by the sharp clack of a gate being opened. All these noises fold together into the morning symphony, familiar enough that you no longer notice the individual notes. You step out for a moment, standing in the doorway while the rising sun paints the sky with pale streaks of gold. The air tastes sharper now, warmer than earlier but still brisk. You can see a pair of neighbours inspecting a broken tool, one holding the handle at an awkward angle, both wearing the same sceptical expression. Tools broke often. Metal was precious, but not always strong. You smile a little, remembering that quirky story someone told years ago about a villager who trusted his hoe so much he named it, only to mourn it like a family member when the handle finally split in half. People found humour in hardship because there was no other way to survive it. You return inside as the cottage continues its steady transformation from sleeping space into working space. Blankets rolled, beds pushed aside, the table cleared of everything except what's needed for the hour ahead. You tie your cloak tighter, then reach for a small cloth pouch. Tiny bits of grain, a pinch of herbs, a sliver of last night's loaf. You tuck it inside your belt. A midday meal won't cook itself, and the fields rarely let you return early. But before you leave, you glance once more around the room. The small fire, the faint smell of porridge, the quiet shuffling of people preparing for the day. These early moments, though simple, anchor the rhythm of your life. They remind you that survival begins long before you step into the fields or the workshop. It begins here, in the warm glow of shared effort, shared hunger, and shared hope that today will be manageable. You take one breath, then another, then step toward the door, letting the colder air wrap around you again. Breakfast is over, and the real day awaits. You step out into the crisp morning light with your cloak wrapped tightly around your shoulders, the chill nipping more boldly now that the sun has fully decided to show itself. The sky has shifted from pale grey to a soft, forgiving blue, and a thin mist still clings to the edges of the village paths. It curls around fences, wavers over puddles, and drifts lazily across the thatched roofs like it hasn't quite made up its mind about leaving. You head toward the small pen behind your cottage, boots pressing into the damp earth with a gentle squish. The world smells of hay, cold soil, and something unmistakably animal. Warm fur, stale straw, and that particular barnyard musk that medieval villagers recognized as simply home. Before you even reach the fence, you can hear the mild ruckus of living creatures who have been awake long enough to develop opinions about breakfast. The hens are the first to greet you, or rather, confront you. They rush toward the fence in a feathery blur, making tiny outraged noises as if you're scandalously late. You unlatch the gate, and they explode outward like an impatient parade, their little legs moving faster than seems physically possible. Feathers fluff, wings flap, and one bold hen immediately hops onto a low log as if performing for an audience. Chickens in medieval villages weren't shy. They had personality. They fought, complained, argued, and occasionally decided that your chores needed their supervision. You scatter a handful of grain across the ground, watching the birds descend upon it with chaotic precision. Beaks tap like tiny hammers. Wings brush against your boots. One hen tries to steal a pebble because she thinks it's edible, realizes instantly that it's not, then pecks it angrily anyway. You can't help but smirk. Mornings are better with ridiculous chickens. Next, you turn to the pig. She snorts loudly when she sees you approaching, trotting forward with the swagger of someone who knows she is important. Pigs were valuable in medieval households. Meat, fat, leather, and a surprisingly efficient garbage disposal system all in one clever animal. You toss her a bucket of scraps saved from the last few days, wilted greens, vegetable ends, and a crust so hard you could tile a roof with it. She devours it happily, tail corkscrewing in tight little circles. Behind you, the goat bleats impatiently. She always bleats impatiently. It's her personality trait. You grab a small bundle of hay and offer it through the slats of the pen. She nudges your hand with more enthusiasm than necessary, then gets hay stuck on her face and pretends nothing happened. You scratch her behind the ears and she leans into your hand with dramatic devotion. Goats can be ridiculous, charming, and entirely too clever for their own good. You've learned more than once that she knows how to unlatch the gate if you don't check it twice. As you work, you're struck by how these animals shape the rhythm of the morning. They aren't just chores, they're lifelines. A healthy flock or herd meant food security, trade, manure for crops, and in some cases companionship. They were woven into the social and economic fabric of medieval life. You can't imagine a morning without them. A neighbour appears at the edge of the lane carrying a sack of grain across his shoulder. He nods to you and gestures toward the hens, giving a thumbs up of approval. He's always been fond of your flock, especially the speckled hen who once wandered into his cottage and refused to leave until someone bribed her with breadcrumbs. You wave back, smiling. As you finish tending the animals, you check the troughs one more time, ensuring the water you hauled earlier is enough to last until midday. The pigs grunt contentedly. The chickens gossip loudly among themselves. The goat stares at you like she expects a second breakfast. You close the gate and give it an extra push to make sure it latches, a habit born from hard-earned experience. Once, early last winter, a goat escaped and climbed onto the neighbour's cart, refusing to leave until someone offered her a stolen turnip. That's the sort of morning adventure you prefer to avoid. With the animals fed and satisfied, you take a deep breath. The lingering smell of hay and earthy warmth settles into your clothes, into your hair, into your skin. It's a familiar scent, one you'll carry with you until nightfall, and in its own way, it marks the beginning of the day more clearly than dawn ever could. Your hands are warmed now, your muscles are awake, and with the animals tended, you can finally turn toward the fields that call to you from beyond the village boundary. You step back from the pen, brushing stray bits of hay from your sleeves, though a few strands refuse to let go. The sun edges higher, still soft and low, but bright enough now that the village begins to show its true shape. Uneven fences, worn footpaths, smoke rising from crooked chimneys, and the familiar mosaic of cottages huddled close together as if sharing warmth. You pause for a moment, letting the morning settle into your bones. Feeding the animals always activates a kind of early calm, a rhythm that reminds you why this place, rough as it is, feels like home. Something shifts behind you, a soft scuffling sound. When you turn, you find the cat stretching luxuriously atop an overturned basket. She blinks once, very slowly, as if evaluating whether you're worth acknowledging at this hour. Cats ruled medieval farms in their own quiet hierarchy, working animals yet never fully owned. You crouch and give her a quick scratch under the chin. She purrs with the smug satisfaction of a creature who knows she contributed to last night's peace by keeping the mice from the grain sacks. You murmur a quiet thank you, and she flicks her tail before disappearing beneath a wooden bench, already off to patrol her tiny kingdom. You grab the small rake leaning against the fence and smooth the ground inside the chicken enclosure. It's not glamorous work and it won't stay clean for long, but it helps keep the coop healthier. Medieval villagers understood disease far less scientifically than people do now, but you know from experience that filth attracts trouble. Sick birds, spoiled eggs, and sometimes that odd fungal rot that old folks whisper about when they think no one is listening. A clean pen doesn't guarantee safety, but it gives you a fighting chance. As you work, you hear the creaking of wheels and look up to see a neighbour pushing a barrow piled with straw. He gives you a friendly wave and stops to rest, leaning heavily on the handles. You exchange a few words, nothing heavy, just the usual morning trade of updates. He mentions that one of his cows calved early, safe but small. You congratulate him, knowing that in a place like this the birth of healthy livestock is as important as the birth of a child, perhaps more so depending on the season. He chuckles and adds a joking complaint about the calf trying to stand on his boot while he wasn't looking. A gust of wind rushes by, lifting the edges of your cloak and rattling the wooden gate. You tighten the rope belt around your waist and feel the faint chill creep under your clothing again. You remind yourself that the morning warmth you felt inside the cottage is fleeting. Out here, the air holds on to the night long after sunrise. Even on days like this, where the sky promises mild weather, You feel a little shiver that reminds you, nature always holds the upper hand. You finish your small repairs around the pen, tightening a loose post, removing a sharp splinter, adjusting a broken slat someone must have kicked accidentally last evening. A well-kept coop means safer animals, and safer animals mean security. Chickens may seem minor, but they provide eggs, meat, and feathers, and sometimes their loud squawks warn you about foxes sneaking through the hedges. As you check the final latch, you remember the peculiar story someone once told during a long winter evening. A hen in a nearby village was rumoured to lay miraculous eggs, tiny, perfect spheres the size of nuts, which people believed foretold the weather. Whether true or not, the tale became a topic of endless gossip until someone revealed the hen had simply grown old. Medieval villagers loved stories, even silly ones, because stories filled the slow hours that work couldn't claim. You lift your basket of tools and step away from the animals, glancing back one more time. The goat stares at you as if offended that breakfast is over. The pig snorts contentedly, already rolling in a patch of soft soil. The hens dart through the yard with chaotic energy, each convinced she's on an important mission. Chaos, yes, but familiar chaos. You close the wooden gate behind you with a satisfying thump, testing it twice to be safe. Animals, like people, find ways to surprise you, especially on mornings when you're distracted. With the chores done and the livestock settled, a new silence settles over you, one that feels different from dawn's hush. This is the quiet that follows accomplishment, that small exhale before the fields claim the rest of your strength. You take one last breath of the barnyard air and turn toward the path leading out of the village. The animals are satisfied, fed, and calm. Now it's your turn to face the labour waiting in the open fields. You sling your small cloth pouch over your shoulder, tighten your cloak once more, and begin walking toward the edge of the village where the fields stretch outward like a patchwork quilt stitched together by centuries of hands. The path is narrow, beaten down by generations of boots, hooves, and wooden cart wheels. Dew coats the grass on either side, glistening in the sunlight that finally feels strong enough to paint the world in gentle gold. As you walk, you hear the steady rise of morning sounds, the rhythmic thud of someone chopping wood, the clink of metal as a neighbour sharpens a blade, the rustling chatter of villagers gathering tools for their own work. Children run past you, chasing each other with bare, dusty feet until someone calls them back to help with smaller chores. A dog trots behind them, tail wagging like a banner caught in the wind. You pass by the last row of cottages, each one unique in its imperfections. A thatched roof with a sag in the middle. A door that leans outward as though it's perpetually surprised. A window patched with oiled parchment instead of glass. Each home holds its own story. Lost spoons, mended shirts, nights of feasting and nights of hunger. The village is small, but full of life lived loudly and plainly. Once beyond the cottages, the view opens. You inhale deeply. The fields smell of damp soil, trampled grass, and something faintly sweet. Last summer's remnants lingering beneath the earth. Stretches of farmland roll outward in uneven waves, divided by hedges, ditches, and narrow banks. You can see distant village boundaries marked not by walls, but by subtle changes in the landscape. The curve of a field, a line of trees, a slightly different shade of earth where one manor ends and another begins. You walk along the track leading to your assigned strip of land, your family's plot in the open field system. It's a long, narrow strip, one of many scattered across the area, rather than gathered into one neat piece. Medieval farming was communal in ways that might seem strange now. Everyone's land was interwoven like threads in a tapestry, forcing cooperation and ensuring that no household stood entirely alone. You pass a few other villagers heading the same direction, each carrying their own tools: hoes, mattocks, rakes, bundles of seed for the coming season. A familiar weight settles over you, not dread, just the deep awareness of the work ahead. The fields shape the day more than the sun does. There's always something to tend, soil to turn, weeds to pull, stones to remove, ditches to clear. Even on days when nothing seems urgent, the land expects your hands. And if you ignore it too long, it finds ways to remind you, with failing crops, stubborn clay, or the sudden appearance of invasive plants that seem determined to take over your barley patch. As you walk, an older woman catches up to you, leaning slightly on her sturdy walking stick. Her steps are slow but steady. She carries a woven basket filled with seed grain. She nods at you and comments on the light frost she saw clinging to the north fields earlier, a quiet warning that the soil might still be hard in places. You thank her and tuck that detail into your mind. In this world, people don't give advice lightly. A small observation from an elder can mean the difference between a productive morning and hours of frustration. You reach the ridge overlooking your strip of land. From here, you can see your section clearly. Rough soil mixed with scattered stones, the memory of last season's crop marked by faint rows. A couple of crows hop boldly at the edge, eyeing you with the arrogance of creatures who believe they own the land more than anyone else. You pick up a loose pebble and toss it in their direction, not to harm them, but to persuade them that breakfast must be sought elsewhere. They squawk indignantly and flap away. As you descend toward the field, you're aware of a quiet shift inside you. Morning chores at home warm your body, but stepping onto the open land awakens something else: discipline, patience, and the resilience that medieval life demanded from everyone. You plant your feet firmly on the soil, feeling its coolness seep upward. You let your fingers trail through the dry stalks left from last year, then reach for your tool. This is where the true work of the day begins. You plant your heel in the soil, testing its firmness. Gives just a little beneath your weight. Soft enough to work, but not soft enough to trust. The sun hangs low behind you, throwing long shadows across the field, turning every clod of earth into a small hill. Birds wheel overhead, their calls breaking the silence like tiny bells. You take a moment to breathe it all in. This is the heartbeat of medieval life, the quiet beginning of fieldwork, steady and unremarkable, yet absolutely essential. You set your tool, an iron-tipped hoe with a handle smoothed by years of hands, against the ground. The first few cuts into the soil are always slow. You carve into the earth, lifting small chunks and flipping them to expose the darker, damper soil beneath. Each movement has weight. The twist of your wrist, the bend of your back, the push of your foot anchoring your stance. Your breath eventually syncs with the rhythm, becoming part of the motion rather than interrupting it. Around you, others are settling into their own tasks. A man a few strips over is gathering stones into a rough pile, muttering under his breath at each new one he uncovers. A pair of women in the next field work side by side, raking away dry grass and weeds while talking quietly. Their voices drift toward you as faint whispers. Something about a lost sheep, something about a neighbour who tripped over his own rake yesterday. Gossip is subtle out here. It moves like wind through wheat, soft and persistent. Your hands warm as you work, the earlier chill fading from your fingers. You can feel the beginnings of a dull ache in your arms, an ache you've known your entire life. Medieval villagers didn't need fitness routines. The land handled that. Every swing of the hoe, every stoop to remove a stone, every careful pull of a weed is part of the long, steady conversation between you and the soil, and it's a conversation you've learned to understand intimately. After a while you pause, resting the handle of your tool against your shoulder. You wipe your brow with the back of your sleeve, noticing how the morning sun makes the dew retreat in shimmering waves. The smell of the earth grows stronger, richer, as the ground warms. You crouch to examine a stubborn patch of weeds that seems determined to reappear no matter how often it's uprooted. You dig around the base with your fingers, shaking loose a clump of tangled roots. As you work, you remember something an older farmer once told you. If you treat the land like a stranger, it'll fight you. Treat it like a partner, and it'll feed you. At the time, you laughed quietly, thinking he was simply being poetic, but years of tending your strips have taught you that he was right. Soil shifts each season with the weather, the crops planted before, and the year's overall luck. You adapt not with force, but with patience. A crow lands nearby, eyeing you suspiciously. He hops forward, tilting his head, trying to gauge whether you're about to feed him or chase him off. Crows in medieval villages were seen as both pests and clever allies, ruiners of crops, but also keen indicators of changing weather. You glance up at the sky, clear for now. Not today, you murmur, waving a hand to send the bird fluttering away. He squawks indignantly and joins a small flock circling overhead. You continue working, loosening the soil and pulling stray weeds. Your movements become smoother. The field begins to take shape. The lines straighter, the earth turned evenly, the rough patches tamed into something manageable. Eventually you step back to admire the progress. It's not spectacular, but it's satisfying. This is the kind of work that doesn't announce itself but accumulates quietly, shaping the security of seasons to come. A neighbour passes along the track carrying a wicker basket filled with tools. She stops long enough to comment that the north field might flood this spring if the rain continues, a warning disguised as a casual remark. Medieval villages shared advice freely because everyone's survival was entangled. You thank her, pocketing the information for later. You'll need to reinforce the small drainage ditch near your strip before the next heavy rain. As the sun rises, warming your shoulders and casting a brighter glow on the fields, you feel the morning's purpose settle fully upon you. The village is behind you now, humming with its own tasks. Here, in the open expanse of land, you're not just part of the community, you're part of the landscape itself. Each motion you make shapes the ground that will feed you months from now. The fields have claimed you for the day, and in their silent, steady way, they welcome you back. The sun lifts higher, warming the fields just enough to loosen the morning stiffness from your back. You adjust your grip on the hoe and continue working, settling into that oddly hypnotic rhythm that comes when repetition becomes its own kind of quiet. Every swing sinks into the soil with a soft thud. Every lift exposes a new patch of earth, dark and damp beneath the sun-faded surface. This is the part of the day where time stretches and blurs, not because nothing is happening, but because everything happening is familiar. You shift your weight forward, planting your foot firmly before driving the tool into another stubborn section of ground. Your muscles protest a little, but you push through. Medieval villagers worked long hours, and bodies adapted out of necessity rather than design. Your hands toughened years ago, each callus a permanent souvenir of mornings just like this one. A man working a few strips away suddenly straightens, rolling his shoulders with a loud groan that echoes across the field. You can't help but smile. That sound could belong to anyone here. Everyone feels it. The long pull of soil, the strain of repetitive motion, the simple exhaustion that settles into bones like an old friend. Yet no one complains for long. Complaints don't feed families. Hands do. You push through another row, dragging the hoe through soil that clings stubbornly to the blade. When you pause to knock the dirt loose, you notice tiny bits of white shell mixed into the earth. Oyster shells, just a few fragments, left there by someone long before you. You once heard that people mixed crushed shells into the soil to enrich it, especially in coastal villages. Whether this patch was improved intentionally or simply inherited from some long-forgotten meal, it reminds you that generations have touched this same land. You're part of a chain, not a beginning. A group of villagers gathers near a ditch a short distance away. Their voices rise in a blend of concern and irritation. You wander closer, tool resting against your shoulder. The ditch walls have collapsed in one spot, water pooling where it shouldn't. Last year's heavy rains carved new channels through several fields, leaving small problems that become big ones if ignored. A few people step into the mud, testing its depth. Someone mutters that this will take the better part of the afternoon to fix. You offer a few words of commiseration, knowing full well that ditches are temperamental beasts, always shifting, filling, collapsing, or running dry at the worst possible moment. They were as essential to medieval farming as tools or seed grain, guiding water where it needed to go and keeping it away from crops when necessary. Most of the villagers nearby already carry shovels or long-handled spades, expecting this kind of problem to emerge eventually. You make a mental note to help once your own morning work is finished. Returning to your strip, you dig deeper into the soil to loosen the more stubborn clumps. Sweat begins to gather along your hairline despite the cool wind. You wipe it away with the inside of your sleeve, noticing how the sun has shifted while you worked. Hours pass quietly, when the fields have your full attention. A rustling sound draws your gaze to the tall hedgerow bordering the south side of the field. A pair of small birds flit in and out of the branches, carrying bits of dried grass in their beaks. They're building a nest again, right in the same spot where they nested last year. You watch them dart back and forth, marvelling at how their tiny bodies manage so much purpose. A few villagers joke that birds are better workers than people because they refuse to waste daylight. Others believe birds sense the mood of a village, flocking more when the harvest will be good. Old folk sayings like that stick around because they bring a spark of personality into the long hours of labour. A faint shout breaks your focus. Someone calls your name, waving from the far end of the field. You lift a hand in acknowledgement. It's nothing urgent, just the daily check-in between neighbours, a way to confirm everyone is alive, working, and not secretly sinking into mud or trapped under a toppled tool. Mutual care was less sentimental in medieval life and more practical. You watch out for others because you know they'll watch out for you when you need it. You return to your row and dig in again, letting your body settle into the movement. The soil yields reluctantly in some places, willingly in others. The sun warms your back. The wind brushes across your face, and as your tools bite deeper into the earth, you feel the invisible weight of the day pressing forward. Slow, steady, and completely unavoidable. This is the rhythm of fieldwork, relentless, grounding, and strangely peaceful. The hours slip into each other with the smooth, steady ease of long practice. You can feel the work settling deeper into your arms, your shoulders, your lower back. Not sharply, not painfully, just the inexorable tightening that reminds you your body is doing exactly what it was shaped to do. You adjust your stance, sinking your heel into the earth before swinging the hoe again, letting the weight of the tool carry part of the effort. Medieval tools may have been simple, but they were designed around the body's natural mechanics. You learn their rhythms the way you learn a familiar melody. A gust of wind sweeps across the open field, rattling the hedges and sending a small flurry of loose straw-like stalks tumbling across your boots. A few land on your cloak and cling stubbornly until you brush them aside. You pause for a moment, rolling your shoulders and stretching your back, hearing the soft crackle of stiff joints, waking up again after the repetitive motion. When you straighten fully, you let your eyes drift across the field to take in the scene. People dot the land like moving brush strokes, some bent low, pulling weeds, others standing straight as they toss stones toward growing piles at the field's edge. A man further down wrestles with a stubborn root, digging and tugging with alternating bursts of force and muttered curses. You smirk quietly. Roots always fight like they're defending their territory. A woman in a faded blue wimple works beside him, methodically gathering the weeds he uproots and tossing them into a wicker basket slung over her shoulder. You return to your own task, hacking through the soil layer by layer. The sun inches higher, casting a warm glow that mixes with the earthy scent rising from the ground. Every time you lift a clump of soil, you feel the land's quiet protest, its resistance, its give, its grudging cooperation. You realize you've stopped thinking about the strain entirely. Your body moves on autopilot, guided by repetition and routine. Your stomach growls softly, reminding you that your early bowl of porridge is long gone. But before you reach for your small cloth pouch, you glance up again and notice one of the villagers has begun dragging a crude-wheeled cart closer to the communal ditch. The morning's collapsed wall is officially today's group project, it seems. Already 2 men prod the muddy section with long poles, testing the stability before digging deeper. These ditches, narrow and often overlooked, shape the success of whole seasons. Too much water and the crops drown, too little and they wither. Keeping them healthy is as essential as tending the soil itself. You walk over to lend a hand for a bit. As you help shift some loose earth, one of the older men tells you a story. Something about a ditch up on the far ridge that moved overnight decades ago. People believed it was a spirit shifting the land, though the man laughs and admits now that it was probably just years of erosion. Still, the story lived on long enough to become a village joke. If your ditch collapses, blame the spirits. If it collapses twice, blame yourself for ignoring it. You laugh with him, then move along, returning to your strip once the ditch crew is well underway. Villagers share labour the same way they share stories, with a kind of unspoken expectation that doing so is simply part of being human. You never work entirely alone because no one here can work entirely alone. You lift the hoe again, feeling your breath deepen with each swing. Sweat gathers at the nape of your neck despite the breeze. The cloud of crows that had been circling earlier now settles on a distant fence, watching your work with the judgmental curiosity only crows can manage. You wave your arm once and they explode upward again in a flapping, indignant burst. Eventually you pause, letting the tool drop lightly against your boot. Your heart beats steadily, not fast, not strained, just steady. You take a sip from the small flask of watered ale tucked in your belt. It's warm now, but it refreshes you enough to keep going. Looking round once more, you feel the peculiar peace that comes not from rest, but from repetition. Medieval life is full of relentless labour, yes, but there's something grounding about it. The land doesn't make demands out of cruelty. It asks only for care, patience, and presence. And in return, it nurtures you in ways that feel almost intimate. You shift your feet, grip the hoe again, and return to the rhythm. Soil lifts, breath deepens, and the world narrows to the small patch of earth in front of you. The morning may be wearing on, but the work, steady, quiet, and strangely satisfying, carries you forward. You keep working your strip of land until the rhythm becomes something like a hum beneath your ribs, steady, predictable, familiar. But slowly, as the sun climbs, you begin to notice something subtle changing across the fields. The thuds of hoes striking earth become less synchronized. The murmurs between workers grow louder. And then it happens. The morning quiet starts to fray into something far more alive. the gentle rise of village talk. You straighten your back, stretching until you feel a small, satisfying crack along your spine. When you glance around, you catch the unmistakable look in a neighbour's eye, the moment when fieldwork becomes companionable instead of solitary. You prop your tool against your hip and drag your forearm across your forehead, wiping sweat that's begun to bead despite the mild weather. It begins, as it always does, with the people working closest together. Two women on the next strip lean in, their voices drifting through the breeze. At first it's simple, comments about the frost, complaints about a stubborn weed, a sigh about someone who left their tools out overnight again. But then the tone shifts, and you can feel the gentle tug of curiosity pulling you toward their voices. Gossip in a medieval village isn't just entertainment, it's a social map, an early warning system, a thread that ties everyone together. Finally, someone calls your name, not loudly, just enough to travel across the neat row of turned earth between you. You step closer, leaning on your hoe like a walking stick. A woman in a faded green kirtle jerks her chin toward you. "Did you hear?" she asks. There it is, the daily spark. You raise an eyebrow but say nothing. It's an unspoken rule. Whoever starts the story owns its first breath. She glances around conspiratorially before continuing. "The miller's apprentice fell into the pond last night, entirely sober too." You snort before you can stop yourself. It takes effort for anyone to fall into that pond. The banks are gentle, the water shallow. You can't even imagine how someone managed to topple in accidentally, unless fate decided to test the boy's balance, or the lad decided to practice walking in the dark. A small ripple of laughter travels across the nearby strips. Someone else chimes in. "Saw him this morning. Smelled like a wet sheep." The whole group chuckles and you feel your shoulders loosen with the easy warmth of shared amusement. Gossip here rarely stings. It's light, communal, a little mischievous, but rarely cruel. People know where the line is. They know how much a small story can brighten the monotony of pulling weeds from stubborn soil. Another voice drifts in from behind you. A man whose face is already flushed from exertion. "Speaking of sheep, did my old ewe wander into your yard again last night? Because she vanished." You shake your head but smile. His sheep has a reputation for ignoring fences the way birds ignore borders. She's been found chewing herbs in other people's gardens, sleeping beside the forge, and once tried to follow the blacksmith into the church. No one knows why she's so stubborn, but everyone has a tale about her. "I haven't seen her," you say, "but if she shows up for breakfast, I'll send her home." He accepts this with a resigned sigh. If she's eaten through Martha's vegetable patch again, I'll never hear the end of it. You continue turning soil, but the conversation doesn't fade. If anything, it grows livelier. Someone brings up a rumour about a trader arriving next week with bolts of dyed cloth. Blue, the rare kind that's worth more than some people earn in a month. Someone else mentions the Lord Steward passing through recently, inspecting the fields with an expression so stern that even the crows stayed quiet. You don't know how true any of it is, but you listen, letting the words settle in your ears like sparks of colour against the brown monotony of farmland. Gossip carries hints of truth, exaggerations, warnings, hopes. It's how the village learns, adapts, anticipates. In a world without written news, every whispered story feels like a piece of the puzzle. As the labour continues, you find yourself laughing along with a few neighbours. Someone tells a tale about a travelling peddler who tried to sell magic beans last summer. Someone else claims that a fox has been stealing eggs, and that its tracks near the hedge look unnervingly clever, as if the animal has developed a strategy. You make a mental note to watch your hens more carefully, though the idea of a fox planning a coordinated operation makes you smile. As the wind picks up, carrying voices across the rows, you realise something important. This is the social glue of the village, the music that keeps everyone going through the relentless labour. Tales weave through the fields as surely as the roots beneath your feet. And in this moment, between the steady work of your hands and the drifting stories of your neighbours, the morning feels lighter, less demanding, and a little more human. The conversation spread gradually across the field, each patch of land becoming its own little pocket of chatter. You keep working your strip, but the rhythm now shares space with the ebb and flow of voices around you. The hoe bites into the soil, but your attention drifts as people stitch stories together with the same repetitive ease as your labour. A voice calls out from the far side of the field. It's old Garin, the village's unofficial historian, leaning on his spade the way one might lean on a lectern. "Did you hear about the thief caught near the oak grove?" he says, loud enough that half the workers turn their heads. His tone alone promises something ridiculous. "Caught him trying to make off with a goose twice his size." A ripple of amusement spreads. You raise an eyebrow. A goose twice anyone's size is, of course, an exaggeration, but exaggeration is half the point. Garin delights in inflating the details of every story until they're barely believable, and everyone enjoys the theatre of it. "I bet the goose chased him first," someone mutters, and the closest workers laugh. Medieval geese are notoriously aggressive. Small feathered tyrants who guard property with more commitment than some humans. You once saw one chase a full-grown man off a garden path with terrifying efficiency. But Garin isn't finished. He waves a hand dismissively. "They say he was covered head to toe in mud. Claimed he fell, but I say the goose fought back." The older man grins, his teeth yellowed but his eyes gleaming with mischief. You don't steal from a bird like that and walk away unsmeared. You return to your work, but the laughter lingers. Stories like these bring warmth to the day, a kind of shared humour that softens the relentless drag of labour. You've learned over the years that even the most mundane work becomes easier when accompanied by a running feed of half-truths and small scandals. Then a quieter voice catches your ear. Elswith, who rarely speaks unless she has something worth saying. "There's talk the tanner's apprentice found a strange bone near the creek," she says, keeping her head low as she picks at a stubborn weed. "Longer than his arm, with grooves like nothing the butcher recognises." You pause mid-swing. Strange bones always stir speculation. Medieval villagers, after all, lived close to the land but had no scientific framework to understand the oddities it occasionally revealed. Some believed these large bones came from giants. Others thought they belonged to monstrous beasts that once roamed the world. A few joked that they belonged to someone who ate too many festival pies. "What kind of bone?" you ask. Elswith shrugs, her shoulders barely moving under her woolen shawl. "He said it looked like it belonged to a creature that could swallow a sheep whole." She lifts her eyes for a moment, gauging your reaction. "Maybe just a cow bone that washed oddly in the current. But it's something to talk about." You nod slowly. It probably is just a cow bone, but the image of some enormous, long-vanished beast prowling the ancient landscape adds a spark of wonder to the morning. Medieval minds were rich with stories, not because people were naive, but because they lived in a world where natural mysteries demanded explanation. And where facts were scarce, imagination filled the gaps. Another worker joins the conversation, shoveling soil as he speaks. Speaking of vanished creatures, someone swears they heard wolves near the ridge last night. He eyes the horizon, squinting as if expecting a wolf to stroll into view just to prove his point. Sounded like 2, maybe 3. That gets everyone's attention. Wolves were no joke. Even if sightings were rare, rumours travelled fast. You scan the distant tree line instinctively, though. All you see are the shifting shadows beneath the branches. "Probably just dogs," someone replies, but their voice lacks conviction. "Or foxes," another suggests. Foxes don't howl, Elswyth counters. A quiet settles over the group. Not fear exactly, but that ancient awareness that the wilderness is never far away. Medieval villagers lived with that knowledge pressed gently, constantly into their bones. You file the warning away without overthinking it. Still, the mood doesn't stay heavy. It never does. The conversations weave onward, finding smaller topics. Whose bread rose strangely this week? Whose child chased a duck until both fell into a puddle? Whose sheep keeps wandering into the wrong paddock? You laugh at the memory of that last one, remembering how you once spent a full hour trying to coax a stubborn ewe out of a neighbour's herb garden. She responded by eating every last sprig of dill before finally agreeing to leave. As the wind carries these voices across the field, you realise something quietly profound. Gossip isn't just about entertainment or information. It's how people remind each other they belong here. It's how the village breathes. The soil under your feet, the weight of your tool, the rise of laughter across the rows. Together they form a rhythm stronger than any single task. You dig, you listen, you respond, you laugh. Work becomes lighter not because it changes, but because it becomes shared. And in that shared rhythm the village binds itself tighter. By late morning the sun hangs high enough to flatten the shadows and warm the back of your neck, reminding you that the hours spent in the fields are starting to accumulate. Your hands throb with that familiar dull ache, the kind that feels less like pain and more like confirmation that you're doing exactly what your ancestors did, day after day. You rest your hoe in the crook of your arm, shifting your weight onto your heels as you take in the field one last time before heading back toward the village. It's not quite midday, but the workable morning hours are running thin, and now comes a different kind of labour, less physically punishing maybe, but demanding in its own rhythm. The repairs, mending, patching, and improvisation that keep a medieval household afloat. You gather your tools, slipping them into the small canvas pouch slung across your waist. As you begin the walk back toward the village lane, the wind shifts behind you, carrying with it the faint scent of wood smoke and the comforting clatter of someone already beginning their midday chores. That transitional moment is always strange. The one where you leave the solitude of the field and step back into the village's humming body. Your boots thud against packed earth as you enter the lane. Ahead you see a woman crouched near her cottage wall, working the last bit of mud into a fresh patch on the wattle and daub exterior. The mixture glistens wetly, flecked with straw and small stones. She hums softly as she works, smoothing the surface with a wooden paddle. Her hands are stained a deep brown up to the wrists, but she looks content. There's a rhythm to this repair work that's almost meditative. You raise a hand in greeting. She looks up, smiles, and nods toward her wall. "Took a beating in last week's rain," she says. "Can't let it get ahead of me." You nod back, fully understanding. If you ignore a crack in a cottage wall long enough, the entire structure might start to sag, and once things sag, they rarely stop on their own. Medieval homes required more attention than any person could comfortably give. But comfort isn't part of the bargain here. You turn toward your own cottage, noticing immediately that your fence gate hangs slightly crooked. The top hinge has slipped again. You sigh, roll your sleeves up, and set to work. The wooden peg that holds the hinge in place has swollen from moisture, slowly working loose. You tug it free, carve the swollen section smooth with the small knife you keep tucked in your belt, then hammer it back into place using the side of your hand and a small stone nearby. It fits tighter this time, a small victory. As you're finishing, a young boy trots past, holding a broken wooden ladle like it's a tragic relic. "Mum says it snapped on the porridge pot," he explains when he notices your glance. "Can you fix it?" You motion him closer and examine the break. The ladle's handle split right at the thinnest point. Is just common fate. You tell him to wait a moment, Then fetch a small strip of leather from a pouch near your doorway. Wrapping it tightly around the brake, you secure it with a few precise knots. The boy beams, clutching the resurrected ladle like a treasure, and runs back to his cottage with a kind of triumph only children can manage. You wipe your hands on your tunic and step back into your yard. It's remarkable how quickly a few simple repairs can swallow the late morning. A loosened hinge, a broken handle, and next on your list, the bucket with the loose iron band. You fetch the bucket and set it onto a flat stone. The iron ring around its base has slipped slightly, causing the wood slats to gap when filled with water. You work at it with a small wooden mallet. Tap, rotate, until it settles more snugly. It's not perfect, but perfection doesn't exist here. You aim for functional, and if you're lucky, reliable. Around you the village grows louder, fuller. Someone beats a rug with a stick, sending dust billowing into the lane. A pair of older men sit on overturned barrels repairing a ploughshare, muttering back and forth about whether the metal is too brittle this season. Someone else bristles a broom head using twigs and twine. The entire village becomes a living workshop. You wander toward the shed-like structure by your cottage and peek inside. Tools hang from crude hooks, wooden rakes, a hand-forged sickle, a hammer with a cracked handle waiting to be replaced. Your gaze drifts to the pile of raw materials in the corner. Extra straw, spare cloth, a few irregular planks of wood you hope to turn into something useful one day. You grab the hammer with the cracked handle and examine it. A repair like this is nearly a ritual. You remove the head, strip away the splintered wood, and fit a fresh handle carved from last winter's hardened ash. Sliding the iron head back onto the new handle, you tap it into place until it sits firm and steady. You test the grip, solid. This is the heart of midday labour. Fixing, patching, preparing, making the things you depend on dependable again. Because here, nothing survives long without your hands guiding it back to form. As you step outside again, pulling the new hammer from your belt, the wind carries the scent of cooking grains from a nearby hearth. The midday meal is coming, but there are still a few repairs left before you can rest your hands. You set the freshly repaired hammer on the small bench outside your cottage and flex your fingers, feeling the stiffness beginning to creep into your knuckles. It's the kind of stiffness that comes not from exhaustion, but from switching between different kinds of work. Field labour bends your back and shoulders. Repair work narrows your focus, tightening your fingers and wrists. Both kinds of work pull at different parts of you, as if reminding you that survival here requires the whole body, not just its strongest muscles. A soft clatter draws your attention. A neighbour approaches, holding a dented metal pot that looks as though it has lived through 5 small wars. She lifts it with an expression somewhere between embarrassment and hope. "Do you think this can be fixed?" she asks, running her thumb along the uneven rim. "It buckled when it fell off the hook last night." You motion for her to set it down. You examine the pot, turning it in your hands. The metal isn't cracked, just bent. That's a relief. With a little pressure and a few strategic taps, you can return it to something resembling round. You warm the metal slightly by holding it near your fire, just enough to soften it, then use the back of your mallet along the interior. Tap, rotate, tap, rotate. Slowly, stubbornly, the pot begins to remember its original shape. She watches, quiet but grateful. When you hand the pot back, it's not perfect, but it's functional. Here, nothing has to be beautiful, as long as it works. She thanks you with a small bundle of dried herbs as payment. Rosemary, thyme, and a tiny sprig of something rarer. Marjoram, maybe, a prized flavour. You tuck it into your belt pouch, knowing it will turn an ordinary dinner into something warmly fragrant. Across the lane, a young man sits cross-legged in front of a broken stool, frowning deeply at one of the legs. As you approach, he shakes his head. "It wobbles," he says miserably, "and no matter how much I shave the peg, it still won't fit." You take the leg and examine the joint. The peg is too dry, shrunk slightly from the indoor heat last night. You tell him to soak it in water for a short while. It'll swell just enough to seat snugly. His eyes brighten with new respect for advice that sounds like magic, until you understand the wood's temperament. Wood taught its own lessons, if you lived closely enough to it. You continue down the lane, passing clusters of small tasks in motion. A pair of children gather feathers to stuff a cushion. A man plucks loose tufts of wool caught on a hedge, each tiny piece saved carefully, destined to become thread. Someone spreads a blanket over a low fence to shake out trapped dust. The sunlight turns the drifting cloud into a shimmering veil. Another villager kneels in the mud repairing a clay jug with warm resin, blowing gently on the patch as if coaxing it to life. Everywhere you look, someone is mending, restoring, salvaging. Little chores thread themselves into the late morning like beads on a cord, and despite the repetition, there's a rhythm here. Half craftsmanship, half necessity. You feel it settle around you as naturally as breath. Then comes a sound you know well, the rough scraping of a whetstone. You turn to see a man sharpening a curved blade, his scythe, resting in his lap like a sleeping animal. Sparks jump lightly as metal kisses stone. He nods at you without pausing, focused entirely on the motion. Sharpening isn't just a chore, it's a ritual. Dull tools drain strength. Sharp ones conserve it. That was a universal truth passed down like inherited wisdom. You pick up your own small blade, your sickle, and run your thumb along the edge. It's duller than you'd like. So you sit beside your cottage, pull your own whetstone from your pouch, and begin to sharpen it with slow, patient strokes. The rasp of metal against stone mixes with the faint chatter of the lane. You fall into a quiet rhythm. Stroke, check, adjust. The blade slowly regains its bite. As you work, an elderly man wanders by, leaning heavily on his carved walking stick. He pauses long enough to glance at your blade and nod approvingly. "A sharp tool," he rasps, "means a softer day." Then he continues his walk, muttering about someone leaving a gate open again. Proof, perhaps, that small frustrations never change across generations. You finish sharpening, wipe the blade clean with a scrap of cloth and hold it up to the light. Much better. You slide it carefully back into its leather sheath, feeling a small swell of satisfaction at having prepared something properly. Small victories matter here. They accumulate quietly into the fabric of survival. Your stomach growls gently, reminding you that midday approaches swiftly. You take one last walk around your home, checking for anything else in need of attention. Loose roofing straw, a sticky latch, a cracked bowl left drying in the sun. You patch what you can, set aside what must wait, and breathe in the warm, earthy scent of a village deep in its daily maintenance. There's always more to fix. Always another crack, another tool, another loose board. But for now, the essential work is done. And with repairs behind you, your thoughts turn naturally toward the next part of the day, preparing something warm and hopefully comforting for the midday meal. By the time the sun reaches its comfortable perch above the village, your stomach has shifted from a gentle murmur to a steady, insistent reminder that morning porridge can only carry a person so far. The air feels warmer now, not hot, just softly pleasant, filled with the mingled sense of smoke, earth, and something faintly savoury drifting from a cottage a few doors away. Midday is approaching, and with it comes one of the few small pleasures in a medieval villager's day. A warm meal, however simple. You step back inside your cottage, letting your eyes adjust from the bright sunlight to the softer glow of the hearth. The fire has burned down since morning, leaving a low bed of embers and a few glowing logs. You crouch and coax the flames upward, feeding them slender pieces of dry kindling until the fire wakes with a lively crackle. It's a gentle, comforting sound, the heartbeat of the home. Your small cloth pouch, carried with you since dawn, now becomes the starting point of lunch. You draw out its contents: a bit of leftover grain, a small twist of herbs, a sliver of last night's bread hardened to the point of becoming nearly weaponized, and, if you're lucky, a small chunk of salted fish saved from a pass-barter. Today, the fish is present, a tiny wrinkled piece, but enough to flavour a pot. You place your iron pot on the hearthstones and pour water carefully from the bucket you filled earlier. The liquid hisses as it meets the hot metal, creating a thin swirl of steam that rises toward the rafters. You drop in the grain first, stirring with a wooden spoon until the mixture begins to thicken. The texture reminds you of the morning's porridge, but lunch is heartier, more savoury, more grounding. While the grains soften, you crumble the hardened bread between your fingers. It breaks reluctantly, like it resents being disturbed from its dense slumber. You add the shards to the bubbling pot, watching them melt slowly into the mixture. Bread never goes to waste here. Even crumbs become building blocks for meals. You reach for your herb bundle, the one your neighbour gifted you earlier, and pinch off a few dried leaves. As they fall into the pot, the air warms with a bright aromatic scent. Rosemary and thyme blend seamlessly with the thicker, earthier smell of cooking grains. The scent fills the cottage, making it feel bigger somehow, gentler. Outside the door, you can hear a child laughing, followed by the muffled scolding of someone who probably wants them to stop playing and fetch water. Further down the lane, someone bangs a pot loudly, an honest signal that their meal has begun. You glance out briefly and see smoke rising from several hearths. Cooking midday meals unites the village more than any meeting or ritual. Everyone draws into their cottages. Everyone stirs a pot. Everyone hopes that what little they've gathered will produce something warm and filling. The pot simmers steadily. You reach into your pouch for the salted fish and drop it in whole. The tiny piece dissolves easily, sending thin ribbons of flavour through the mix. For a moment you let yourself imagine the luxury of fresh meat, a rabbit perhaps, or even a small chicken roasted slowly on a spit. But luxuries like that are rare, save for harvest festivals, special visitors, or miraculous good fortune. You continue stirring, scraping the spoon along the bottom to prevent sticking. The mixture becomes thick, hearty, and fragrant. Simple, yes, but grounding in the way only a warm pot of food can be in a world where nothing is guaranteed. From outside, footsteps approach. A neighbour pauses at your open doorway, leaning in with a smile. "Smells better than mine," she jokes. You offer her a taste from your spoon. She laughs and waves the offer away, but her expression tells you the humour is real, not envious. This is the kind of friendly exchange that binds the community. She does, however, offer you something in return, a small onion wrapped in a scrap of cloth. "Found 2 this morning in the storehouse. Thought you might like one." You accept it gladly. Onions are treasures. You chop it roughly and toss it into the pot, where it softens almost instantly, releasing a sweetness that brightens the entire mixture. Now the stew resembles something more than sustenance, something comforting. You take a small taste from the edge of the spoon. It's not a feast, but it's warm, savoury and familiar. Exactly what a medieval body craves after hours bent over stubborn soil. You ladle the food into your wooden bowl, watching the steam curl upward like a gentle invitation. You sit on a low stool near the fire, stretching your legs toward the warmth. The first bite sends comfort through your chest, warming you from within in a way the morning hearth never could. Midday food seldom earns praise or poetry, but for a moment, eating this small, humble meal, you feel restored, and the day, for all its demands, suddenly feels manageable again. You finish the last warm spoonful, letting the heat settle deep in your stomach. The simple stew leaves a pleasant heaviness in your limbs, just enough to calm the morning's edge without dulling your senses. The cottage glows softly now, sunlight threading through the shutter cracks and weaving itself across the walls in thin golden lines. Midday meals aren't meant for lingering, but you allow yourself a short pause, appreciating the tiny window of rest before the world outside pulls you back into motion. You set your empty bowl aside and pour a splash of warm water inside it, swishing it gently to loosen the bits of grain and herb. Cleaning wooden bowls must be done quickly. Linger too long and the food dries hard, leaving you to scrape at it like chiseling at stone. You wipe it with a tuft of clean straw, shake out the debris, and place it on the shelf beside your morning bowls. The rhythm of cleaning is as familiar as breathing. Outside, the village has shifted into its midday character, quieter, slower, yet still purposeful. The earlier hammering has softened, replaced by a calmer hum of activity. Children's laughter filters through the half-open door. Someone nearby hums a tune while stirring their own pot. A pair of older women sit on a bench in the sun, taking advantage of the warmth to rest their knees. You stretch your legs and step outside, letting the sunlight touch your face. It's bright enough now that the village feels completely awake. A few neighbours nod to you as you pass, some carrying bowls, others finishing chores they didn't get to earlier. You hear two men discussing the quality of last season's barley and whether the grain will carry well into winter. One complains that the miller's stones are grinding too coarse this year. You smile quietly. Every medieval village has one constant complaint, and it usually circles back to the miller. You walk a little farther down the lane, bowl tucked at your side, and see a group gathered under the shade of a large oak. They've just finished eating too, resting, chatting, and enjoying the brief lull before afternoon tasks reclaim their hands. A few greet you as you approach. "Good meal?" a man asks, wiping his beard with the back of his hand. "Good enough," you say. "Better with an onion." One of the women perks up. "You add an onion? Lucky thing. I haven't seen one in weeks." You shrug modestly. Trade, not luck. Conversation shifts easily from meals to weather, to tools, to the patch of stubborn soil someone has been fighting all week. Midday gatherings like these act as a kind of social reset, a place to exchange small victories, small grievances, and small pieces of news before everyone scatters again. Someone mentions a curious rumour. A travelling peddler in the next village is selling miracle broth made from the bones of foreign beasts. You raise an eyebrow, unsurprised. Peddlers often spun fantastical claims to sell otherwise ordinary wares. Once, a man tried to sell a jar of what he called moonlight oil, which turned out to be nothing more than animal fat scented with stale lavender. It didn't stop half the village from trying it, though. People love hope as much as they love stories. A woman beside you laughs softly. "If that broth could mend cracked walls or keep foxes out of henhouses, I'd buy 10 jars. Or chase off the steward when he comes counting bushels," another adds. The group erupts in knowing laughter. The steward's visits are never welcomed, always too curious, too exacting, too keen on reminding everyone of dues and obligations. Humour becomes a shield against the anxiety he brings, even if only for a moment. You sit beneath the oak for a few breaths, enjoying this shared ease. The tree's broad branches filter the sunlight into shifting patterns on the ground. Birds hop from branch to branch, pecking at acorns and singing idly. The air smells, faintly sweet. Some combination of warming earth, fresh hay, and someone's broth simmering a few cottages away. This moment doesn't last long. Nothing in the medieval village ever does, but it's enough to soften the day, enough to remind you that life here isn't all toil. It's also bursts of humour, small comforts, human warmth pressed into the spaces between tasks. As you rise, dusting soil from your tunic, you pass your fingers along the rough bark of the oak. You feel the solid strength beneath. The same tree that shaded your childhood midsummer games. The same tree people gather under when the heat grows heavy. The same tree someone once carved initials into decades ago. It anchors the lane the way the hearth anchors your home. You turn back toward your cottage, bowl in hand, the sun at your back. The meal has steadied you, and the brief rest has returned clarity to your thoughts. Afternoon is coming, and with it, the call of the marketplace. You leave your cottage with your empty bowl tucked under your arm, stepping onto the lane as the village begins shifting out of its midday lull. The sunlight has mellowed into a warm, steady glow, bright enough to illuminate every uneven cobblestone and bent fence post, but gentle enough that shadows no longer stretch sharply across the ground. The breeze carries a blend of scents, a faint sweetness from someone brewing ale, the rich smoke of hearth fires, and the slightly metallic tang that always seems to hover near the blacksmith's forge. It's time to head to the heart of the village, the place where every road, footpath and rumour eventually converges, the marketplace. Even in a small medieval village like yours, marketplace doesn't mean a sprawling square with dozens of stalls. It's simpler than that. Just an open space beside the well where traders lay cloth across barrels or spread goods on blankets, where gossip thickens as surely as the air itself, and where every villager must pass sooner or later. Whether you intend to buy, barter, or simply observe, the marketplace always pulls you in like the tide. You walk toward the centre, passing a few cottages where smoke curls lazily from the chimneys. A group of children play with a hoop made from a twisted sapling, their laughter echoing between the houses like scattered bird song. An elderly woman watches them from her stoop, shelling peas into a wooden bowl with methodical precision. She nods as you pass, her fingers moving without pause. Farther ahead, the soft thump of a hammer emerges from the blacksmith's yard. You catch a glimpse of him through the open shed door, broad-shouldered, sweat slick across his brow, striking iron with measured force. Sparks leap in every direction, a little shower of gold that disappears before touching the ground. He doesn't look up, but you know he's aware of every person who walks past. Blacksmiths always are. The closer you get to the marketplace, the more the noise shifts. Voices blend together, not loud, but layered, inquisitive, purposeful. A donkey brays somewhere protesting its load. Wooden wheels creak on dry axles. The clatter of pottery hints that someone is unpacking wares. You arrive at the well and immediately sense the change in atmosphere. Mid-morning repairs and field labour had their own rhythm. This place has another entirely, one shaped by trade, curiosity, and the quiet thrill of possibility. A cloth trader from a nearby village has set up a simple display across 2 barrels. He's unrolling strips of rough-spun wool dyed in muted shades, greens, browns, the occasional faded red. The colours aren't vibrant, but they catch your eye anyway. In a world of earth tones and practical fabrics, even a slightly brighter thread can feel luxurious. He sees you looking and lifts a bolt of cloth with a flourish, letting the weak sunlight catch the weave. "Sturdy stuff," he says with a wink. "Won't tear unless you want it to." You smile politely. Cloth is precious, and today isn't the day for such indulgences. But you run your fingers along the weave anyway, appreciating its texture, imagining, just briefly, how a bit of colour might transform a tunic or cloak. Nearby, the potter arranges his bowls, jugs and pitchers on a blanket. His hands are coated in a fine dusting of clay that never seems to wash off completely. Among the pieces is a jug with a handle shaped like a bird's neck, a whimsical touch that makes you grin. The potter catches your expression and shrugs modestly. People like a bit of charm with their chores, he explains. Makes fetching water feel less dull. You agree. A small delight can go a long way. At the next stall, a low wooden table propped on uneven legs, sits a woman selling dried fish. Salted, smoked, and unmistakably pungent. She offers you a small piece to inspect. You lift it, inhale the salty aroma, and nod in approval. Fish like this can last months if stored carefully. It's a comfort during winter, a quiet promise of nourishment when the world turns cold and stingy. But the marketplace isn't just about goods. It's also about information. News spreads fastest here. While you move from table to table, you overhear 3 different stories. One woman claims a travelling merchant saw strange lights near the forest edge, dancing blue flickers that vanished before sunrise. A man insists he heard the steward might return sooner than expected to inspect grain stores, and someone swears the cooper is planning to raise the price of barrels after his apprentice accidentally ruined a week's work by leaving freshly shaped staves out in the rain. Whether any of it is true doesn't matter yet. What matters is that the stories exist, and everyone listens just long enough to decide whether they're worth repeating. You stop near a stack of baskets woven from willow branches. The basket maker stands nearby, polishing a handle with a scrap of woolen cloth. One basket catches your attention. You recognise the slightly crooked weave in the corner, the mark of his youngest apprentice. He sees your gaze and nods proudly. He's improving, the basket maker says. Still can't weave a straight line to save his life, but his handles are strong as ox ribs. You pick the basket up, testing its weight, admiring its sturdiness despite its flaws. It's moments like these that give the marketplace its charm. Imperfections displayed openly, talked about without shame, valued because they reflect real hands and real labour. As you continue wandering the stalls, the energy of the place settles over you like a warm cloak. You feel the mild excitement creeping in, the sense that something unexpected might happen here at any moment. A new piece of gossip, a chance barter, a fleeting glimpse of a rare item, or perhaps just the joy of watching people interact, negotiate, tease, bargain, and build relationships through trade. The marketplace is the village's heartbeat, and you've stepped right into its pulse. You drift deeper into the marketplace, weaving between small groups of villagers who've paused mid-chatter or mid-purchase. The sun has warmed the square fully now, softening the hard edges of the well stones and bringing a friendly shimmer to the hanging bits of pottery and metal tools. It's the kind of midday glow that makes even worn-out boots and patched tunics look softened somehow, wrapped in the warmth of shared routine. Near the well, a small knot of people has gathered around a man you don't recognise immediately. He must have arrived recently, judging by the slight dust on his cloak and the travel-worn shoes. A peddler, clearly. His cart is modest, just 2 wheels and a wooden frame, but it's draped with oddities. Small wooden toys, spoons carved with intricate knots, dyed ribbons, brass pins, and a few objects whose purpose you cannot guess at a glance. He winks at you as you approach, and picks up a tiny carved whistle in the shape of a bird. He blows softly. The sound that comes out is surprisingly sweet, clear as a lark call echoing across a meadow. Children nearby gasp, their eyes widening. "Only 3 pennies, he announces, waving the whistle with a flourish. "Or a handful of dried beans. I am flexible." The children scatter, presumably in search of parents or bean-filled pockets. You chuckle and move on. Peddlers always bring a bit of chaos with them. A delightful chaos, though, one that briefly expands the world beyond the village edges. Across the way, a different kind of commotion draws your attention. Two villagers stand over a basket of apples, inspecting each one like a jeweller examining gemstones. The apples, small, mottled and uneven, are still precious this time of year. Fresh fruit is a rare treat outside the harvest months, and it carries with it a quiet thrill. You lift one, rolling it in your palm. It smells faintly sweet, a reminder of late summer hiding beneath its dull exterior. Careful with that one, the seller warns. It bruises if you breathe wrong. You set it down with exaggerated delicacy, earning a few laughs. Apples, fragile as they are, make for good humour when so much else in life is serious. Nearby, a dispute is simmering, the kind that's loud but not angry, more theatrical than heated. A man in a wool cap stands with his arms crossed, trying to convince a woman that her spool of thread is thinner this week than last. She insists it's exactly the same thickness, and if anything, it's sturdier than before. The people watching seem more entertained than invested. You linger just long enough to hear someone whisper, "He just wants a discount," before the argument dissolves into playful bickering. You step away, brushing past two young men comparing knives. One runs a thumb carefully along the blade, testing its sharpness. "Cost me a bowl of honey and 2 mornings. Work," he says proudly. His friend whistles in admiration. You recognise the blade. It belongs to the smith's apprentice, whose work has grown impressively precise of late. You make a mental note to visit the forge later this week. As you walk, a familiar voice calls your name. Turning, you see the alewife standing behind her makeshift stall, a pair of barrels and a stack of wooden mugs. She waves you over. "Trade for a sip?" she asks. "Got something you might want?" She gestures to a bundle resting on her table, wrapped in cloth. You approach, intrigued. Her eyes sparkle with mischief. When she unwraps the cloth, you see it. A small ceramic jar sealed with wax. You lift it cautiously, feeling the weight settle perfectly in your palm. "Honey ointment," she whispers. "Made by my cousin's wife. Good for burns, cracked hands, even sore joints." You raise an eyebrow. "And what do you want in trade?" "Herbs," she says immediately. "The kind you grow behind your cottage. You know which ones." You grin. Fair enough. You'll bring her a small bundle later. For now, she lets you hold the jar a moment longer, before wrapping it again and tucking it safely into her stall. The marketplace is built on exchanges like this. Small, mutually respectful, rooted in trust. As you continue wandering, you notice something quieter happening on the square's far edge. A few villagers sit in a half circle around the storyteller, an old man with a voice rough as grain sacks but eyes bright as ember sparks. He visits once or twice a year, bringing tales from other villages, from roads winding through dense forests, from river banks miles away. You pause near the group, listening from a polite distance. "And there I was," he says, gesturing wildly, "convinced the innkeeper meant to poison me, until I realised it was just the stew, bland enough to terrify anyone unfamiliar with the local turnips." The audience laughs. Even you chuckle. Stories like his help people imagine life beyond their hedges, even if half the details are surely exaggerated. As the marketplace breathes and shifts around you, you take stock of everything you've seen. Trade, barter, laughter, disputes, performances, rumours, and small human connections sparking at every turn. This isn't merely a place to gather goods. It's the woven centre of village life, a place where people see and are seen. You step back, letting the sounds and colours settle into your senses. You carry no new items, yet you walk away feeling richer. Because here, in the heart of the village, the world feels just a little bigger. You step away from the marketplace with the faint echo of laughter still hanging in your ears, the sense of smoked fish and fresh-cut willow still drifting behind you. The sun has rolled comfortably past its highest point, mellowing into the warm gold of early afternoon. This is the hour when conversations grow deeper, when people's guards lower just enough for honesty to slip through. And as you walk down the lane, you sense the subtle shift, the way the village's social fabric begins to stretch, tug, and reveal its hidden seams. You don't intend to seek anyone out, but in a medieval village, you rarely move without encountering someone whose life is interwoven with yours, sometimes gently, sometimes uncomfortably. The first encounter happens near the cooper's shed, where long wooden staves lean in tidy rows. You notice two neighbours standing close together, their voices low but their body language unmistakably tense. You slow your steps, not to eavesdrop, but because the narrow lane leaves little room to pass unnoticed. "Told you he'd accuse me," one mutters. "Said I undercounted the bushels, but I didn't. I swear it on my own hearth." The other sighs. "He accuses everyone eventually. The steward trusts no one." A pause. "Just keep your calm next time. He feeds on quick tempers." You nod politely as you pass them. They force small smiles, the way people do when interrupted mid-grumble. You offer a gentle greeting and continue on, feeling the lingering tension hover like a small storm cloud. This is the undercurrent of village life, the quiet frictions that brew beneath the surface. Not outright war, but small knots of resentment, petty slights, and old hurts that never quite dissolve. Farther along the lane, you find a more cheerful pocket of humanity. 3 women sitting together on low stools, spinning wool with nimble fingers. Their distaffs rest against their thighs, tufts of wool drifting in the air like tiny ghosts. They speak in that half-teasing, half-serious tone, used only among people who know each other too well to bother with politeness. One of them glances at you. Going to the fields again later, she asks, her eyebrows raised in an expression hovering between genuine curiosity and playful judgment. "Likely," you reply. She snorts. "You work more than 3 people combined. Makes the rest of us look lazy." Her friend nudges her with an elbow. "Ignore her. She's only cranky because her spindle fell apart this morning." The first woman huffs, but the corners of her mouth curl upward. She holds out the broken spindle, and yes, it has split into 2 clean pieces. You promise to carve her a new shaft later in exchange for some wool thread. She nods, pleased. Deals like this, small, personal, gentle, are the kind that keep relationships warm even when tempers sometimes run cold. You walk on and soon find yourself near the communal bake oven, a domed structure radiating heat so powerfully that the air around it shimmers. A line of villagers waits with small loaves wrapped in cloth. Bread was often baked here instead of home hearths, both for efficiency and for the thrill of competition. You can always tell who prides themselves on their dough. A man at the front of the line notices you watching and lifts his cloth to reveal his loaf. "Rose better than last week," he boasts. "Thank the new flour." Someone behind him scoffs, or "Thank your wife's kneading." They banter back and forth while you linger at the edge enjoying the exchange. But the bake oven, for all its warmth, is also a cauldron for subtle social drama. Someone mutters that another villager jumped the line last week. Someone else whispers that a loaf mysteriously vanished from the cooling board. A bit of mischief that hasn't been solved. You shake your head lightly. People quarrel over bread the same way they quarrel over gossip, harvests, or which family's goat ruined the herb garden. In a small community, small events carry large weight. As you step away from the oven, you spot 2 men standing in the shade of a cottage roof, their posture stiff, their arms crossed. You can't hear every word, but fragments drift toward you. "Tired of him taking wood from my pile. Only borrowed a little, and I told him so." You always say that. You pause. You know better than to intervene. These are the kinds of conflicts that simmer indefinitely, never enough to break the village apart, but always enough to reshape the atmosphere. You nod to both men as you pass, acknowledging their presence without stepping into their argument. Near the well, you meet one of your older neighbours, a woman with bright eyes and a voice soft as worn wool. She walks with a slight limp, but her expression is full of warmth. "You look thoughtful today," she says. You hesitate, then answer, "Just listening." She hums knowingly. "Listening is good. Better than talking most days." A pause. People carry more inside than they let on, even the loud ones, especially the loud ones. Her words settle into you like warm stones. She's right. Villagers share laughter and gossip easily, but their real fears, poor harvests, illness, the steward's scrutiny, bad winters, live quietly behind familiar smiles. You walk slowly, soaking in the subtle complexities around you. The marketplace gave you energy. The village's social layers now invite you to refine your awareness. Friendships, mild feuds, hidden alliances, debts, favours, teasings, everything intertwines like threads on a loom. Life here isn't just chores and labour. It's a delicate balance of personalities, loyalties, and unspoken agreements. An understanding that balance is as essential as knowing the land itself. The afternoon light softens into a golden haze as you continue down the lane, carried along by the quiet hum of village life. You pass the familiar faces of neighbours who have known you since childhood, and others who have only recently begun to fold themselves into this tightly knit community. Each person contributes something different to the village's social rhythm, and as you move through their spaces, you feel those rhythms brushing against you like warm currents of air. You slow when you reach the small footpath leading to the old willow tree. Beneath its sweeping branches, a pair of villagers sit on the ground with their backs against the trunk, speaking in hushed voices. The willow creates a kind of natural curtain, its long tendrils swaying in slow arcs. A sanctuary for secrets. You don't mean to overhear, but their voices carry just enough for you to catch a few scattered phrases. "She shouldn't have said it so loudly. You know how he gets. Pride like a bull. Best to let her cool off before evening." You step lightly, pretending not to have noticed. Conflicts in the village rarely flare into true hostility. Instead, they smoulder quietly. A pointed comment here, a cold glance there, a silence that lingers longer than it should. Most are resolved with shared labour or a loaf of bread offered in reluctant goodwill. But until they settle, tensions weave silently between fences and hearths. Further ahead, you spot the reeve, thin, sharp-eyed, and carrying himself with the brisk energy of a man who manages everyone else's business whether he means to or not. He stands near a row of fence posts, inspecting them with a kind of stern scrutiny usually reserved for debtors or wayward children. When he sees you, he raises 2 fingers in greeting. You return the gesture while trying not to look guilty. The reeve often inspires that reaction, even in people who have done absolutely nothing wrong. "Fence looks sturdy enough," he remarks, gesturing with his chin. "Better than what I've seen at the south edge." You smile politely. "Thanks, I patched mine this morning." He nods approvingly, then moves on, muttering something about neighbour's haystack leaning dangerously close to collapse. You watch him go, shaking your head. The reeve is both protector and nuisance, an essential cog in the manor's machinery, but the source of many whispered grumbles. Still, he keeps the peace, and peace is worth more than comfort. Just beyond him, you hear laughter. Loud, messy, genuine. It draws you like a magnet. A handful of villagers stand in a loose circle around a young man who appears to be reenacting some unfortunate mishap involving a runaway cart. He mimes running, stumbling dramatically, then tumbling into imaginary mud. The group roars with laughter, doubling over, wiping tears from their eyes. His storytelling is unpolished but spirited, filled with the unself-conscious joy that brightens even the dullest afternoons. Someone notices you and waves you over. "You have to hear this one," a woman says, catching her breath. He nearly flattened half. "The goose yard," the young man grinned sheepishly. "The cart rolled faster than I expected." "And the goose chased you faster than anyone expected," someone else adds, prompting another burst of laughter. You listen, enjoying the warmth of the moment. These scraps of shared amusement lighten the atmosphere, knitting the village closer together. Humour here isn't trivial. It's a survival mechanism, but laughter isn't the only sound filling the air. Nearby, a widow stands by the well, twisting her hands anxiously while talking to the midwife. Their conversation is quiet, but the tension in her shoulders tells its own story. Someone sick, perhaps, or a fear that something minor might become something larger. You offer a respectful nod as you pass, careful not to intrude. People here share burdens, but privacy is a thin but honoured boundary. Behind the well, a teenage girl sits on a low stone wall, mending a torn sleeve. Her stitches are uneven, her jaw set with determination. When you greet her, she offers a small smile. "Trying to fix it before supper," she says. "Mother says if I learn to mend properly, I won't ruin every tunic I own." You laugh gently. "If you saw my first attempts, you'd feel better immediately." Her smile widens and she holds her sewing a little more confidently. As you continue on, you feel the village breathing around you. Its joys, its worries, its whispers, its warmth. Every conversation threads itself into the fabric of community life. Even disagreements, even annoyances, they all become part of the intricate tapestry. And slowly, without realizing it, you feel yourself becoming part of those threads too. The village isn't just where you live, it's where you belong. The afternoon light begins to mellow, softening into that warm honey-gold hue that signals the slow seasonal turn of the day. You step toward the edge of the village where the path widens into a gentle slope of open land, your footsteps crunching softly over dry leaves and patches of brittle grass. The breeze has changed since morning, cooler now, carrying the crisp scent of shifting weather. It's the kind of scent that makes medieval villagers look instinctively toward the sky, searching for clues in clouds, wind, and the silent language of the season. Seasonal work is its own rhythm. Nothing in the village stays the same for long. The tasks that filled your morning last week might be entirely different today depending on the sun's angle, the length of shadows, and the tone of the wind brushing across your cheeks. You know this deeply, not as knowledge learned, but as muscle memory built over years of repeating the same patterns under changing skies. You walk past a cluster of hazel bushes where two boys gather stray branches for kindling. They pause as you pass, offering shy nods, then return to snapping twigs as if the entire winter depends on how neatly they stack their bundle. In a way it does. A bad season means firewood becomes scarce, meals become smaller, warmth becomes harder to hold. Ahead the fields shift in colour and texture. Patches that were bright green just weeks ago now fade into gold or pale brown. The barley stalks have grown brittle, the last of the oats tremble in the breeze. A small clutch of cabbages sits low and sturdy, stubbornly resisting the chill. These subtle changes guide your steps. They tell you which tasks wait for your hands today. You reach a small plot where the flax stands ready for pulling. The stalks sway like thin reeds, whispering softly as they brush against one another. You bend and run your fingers through them. They're dry but strong, promising good fibre. Flax processing is long, tedious work, but doing it now, before heavy rains flatten the stalks, is essential. You grasp a handful and begin pulling them from the ground, roots and all, shaking loose soil with rhythmic flicks of your wrist. Each bundle you pull adds to the growing pile beside you. A woman from the next plot waves in greeting. She's spreading out herbs to dry on a worn cloth, sage, mint, a bit of yarrow. Her garden shrinks this time of year, and each leaf she collects becomes a lifeline for winter stews and simple remedies. "Storm coming soon," she calls out matter-of-factly, glancing toward a bank of clouds forming on the horizon. You look where she points. The clouds aren't dark yet, but they're thick and layered, moving differently from the fluffy ones earlier in the day. You nod. Before or after dusk? She squints. Hard to tell, but definitely before morning. That's enough to make you work faster. In a medieval village, the weather is a partner and a threat. It gives as much as it takes. And when it turns suddenly, the unprepared pay the highest price. You gather the rest of the flax, tying the bundles with loops of twine. When you hoist the final bundle onto your shoulder, you feel the weight settle against your back, a grounding weight, a reminder that preparations now will save work later. A few paces south, the orchard presents another task. Apples cling stubbornly to the higher branches, even though many have fallen and bruised on the ground. You crouch and pick through the fallen fruit, saving the ones still firm enough to keep. You place them carefully into a shallow basket, already imagining how they'll be sliced and dried on racks near your hearth. Dried apple slices aren't just food. They're a comfort tucked into the cold midwinter. Near the orchard fence, a man kneels beside a patch of turnips, his hands moving with the speed of someone who knows the weather is turning faster than expected. He mutters to himself, berating a particularly small root. When he spots you, he calls out, "You'd think the soil would have the courtesy to cooperate one season in a row." You laugh gently. If soil ever behaved, we'd all be out of work. He chuckles and returns to pulling roots, and you move on, clutching your basket. Further ahead, you see another sign of the season's shift. A group of villagers repairing the communal storage shed. The wooden walls have warped from humidity, and gaps have opened between the planks. They work with urgency, sealing the cracks with tar and fresh slats of wood. One of them glances up as you pass and mouths the same warning you heard earlier. "Storm coming." Seasonal tasks don't just change with the weather. They sharpen when the wind hints at urgency. Everything becomes slightly quicker, slightly more deliberate. You walk toward the stream at the far end of the village, your bundles weighing heavier with every step. The stream is lower now, trickling softly over stones instead of rushing loudly the way it does in spring. You kneel by the bank, rinse your hands in the cold water, and watch fallen leaves float lazily downstream. The world quiets around you for a moment. This is the heart of seasonal work, a mix of preparation and acceptance, doing what you can before nature decides what happens next. You rise, gathering your bundles and adjusting the basket against your hip. The wind shift again, cooler, more insistent. Yes, the storm is definitely coming. Time to head back. You begin the walk back toward the village, shifting the flax bundle on your shoulder as you listen to the wind move through the hedges. Its tone has changed. No longer playful, no longer mild. There's a low hum in it now, the kind of hum villagers recognize instinctively. The world is bracing. You pick up your pace, careful but quick, because seasonal work never ends cleanly. It just transitions from one task into the next, carrying you forward like a tide you must learn to ride. On your way back, you pass a pair of boys gathering the last fallen branches near the edge of the path. The older of the two pauses when he hears the wind shift and glances upward, reading the clouds the way some people read faces. "Definitely rain," he mutters. The younger boy mimics his seriousness, nodding gravely as he clutches his bundle tightly. You smile at their earnestness. Weather watching becomes second nature early in life here. Closer to the lane, you spot an elderly man spreading out a worn net near the ditch. He's mending it with thin strands of hemp, his fingers moving slowly but purposefully. "Before the rain ruins it," he explains when he sees you looking. "If it dries wrong, the knots shrink and snap." You step closer and help him gather one drifting edge before the wind tugs it away. He offers you a grateful nod. Shared labour doesn't always mean heavy lifting. Sometimes it's just a steadying hand in the right moment. You resume walking, noticing how the air thickens ever so slightly. The scents around you sharpen: damp soil, aging leaves, a hint of smoke carried from a distant hearth. On a wooden bench near a cottage wall, two women sit slicing onions and carrots, arranging the pieces on cloth to dry before the weather turns. One of them waves a hand in front of her watering eyes. "If the storm ruins this batch," she warns jokingly, "I'll blame your goat." You laugh, promising nothing, because goats rarely obey even the laws of physics. A familiar voice calls out from behind you. Turning, you see the beekeeper, hood pulled back, sleeves rolled to her elbows, carrying a shallow wooden crate filled with precious honeycomb. "Last harvest of the season," she says proudly. "If the rains come hard, the bees will stay tucked in for days." She lifts a piece of comb and lets the weak sunlight catch its golden glow. The richness of it almost feels unreal. You know a spoon of that honey can soothe a sore throat, sweeten a dull porridge, or mend a cracked lip in winter. You offer her part of your dried herb bundle in quiet exchange. She accepts with a warm smile, and in return she tucks a tiny sliver of honeycomb into your pouch. As you continue down the lane, you notice more signs of the shifting season. A cluster of men are reinforcing the thatched roof of a cottage, pressing fresh bundles of straw into a weak patch before the wind can tear it. Someone else is dragging an iron cauldron under cover to prevent rust. A woman stands on a stool, gathering the last of the drying garlic plats before the moisture can spoil them. Everywhere you look, villagers move with the urgency of people who know that one careless afternoon can become a month of regret. By the time you reach your cottage, the sky has taken on a muted, heavy cast. The golden softness from earlier is fading, replaced by a subtle bluish tint that darkens toward the horizon. You climb the small rise to your doorway and glance back toward the fields. They look different now, more subdued, the soil darker even from this distance. A single crow crosses the sky with a long, low caw, flying toward the forest with deliberate purpose. Inside the cottage, you set your bundles down gently. The air feels warmer here, safer, the kind of warmth that anticipates a night where wind taps the shutters like an impatient visitor. You hang the flax near the rafters, lay the apples on a cloth near the hearth, and tuck the honeycomb into a small ceramic pot. Each motion feels like a quiet ritual, things placed where they belong, things made ready for the coming days. As you tidy the small pile of turnips you collected, a memory surfaces, an old story told by elders around winter fires. They spoke of a year when storms came early, faster than anyone expected, and people had to sleep wearing their thickest cloaks for 7 nights straight. You smile faintly at the absurdity of the tale's more dramatic embellishments, remembering how someone swore that their neighbour's boots froze solid mid-step one morning. But beneath the humour lived a truth. Seasons were unpredictable, and preparation was survival. You check your stores, your tools, the latch on your door. Everything seems sound. Everything feels ready. And as you stand in the doorway once more, watching the horizon deepen, you can almost hear the whispered message carried on the wind. The season is changing. Prepare well. You step back inside your cottage just long enough to set your baskets down, wipe your hands, and take a long breath. The storm hasn't broken yet, but the pressure in the air has changed in that unmistakable way that whispers, soon. The light filtering through the shutters has grown cooler, more subdued. It no longer holds the warm confidence of midday. It carries a quiet warning. There's still work you can finish before the first raindrop lands, and most of that work waits at the stream. You grab your small bundle of linen, a handful of tools and a coil of rope, then head down the path that winds gently toward the village's water source. The route is familiar, worn smooth by generations of footsteps. It curves between cottages, through a narrow gap in the hedgerow, and finally opens into the soft grassy banks that cradle the stream. The water runs low this time of year, clear, thin, whispering softly as it trickles over stones polished smooth as old bone. You kneel near the edge, savouring the cool air that lingers here year-round. The stream is the village's quiet sanctuary. People come here for washing, for reflection, for small tasks that require clear water and a moment of calm. You find several villagers already scattered along the bank, each absorbed in their own work. To your left, a woman rinses a cloth embroidered with faded red thread, lifting it gently to let the water run through. To your right, a man crouches with his wooden bucket tipped sideways, scrubbing away the last remnants of grain dust. He glances at you and nods, the kind of soft acknowledgement shared by people who know they're here for the same quiet purpose. You settle on a flat stone and unroll your linen. It's not much. A few small pieces you used earlier to patch tools and bind herbs. But leaving them unwashed would make them stiff as bark by tomorrow. You dip them into the stream and begin working the water through the fibres, rubbing them lightly against the stone. The rhythm is slow, soothing. You can feel the tension of the day slipping off your shoulders, replaced by the gentle pull of flowing water. Washing cloth by the stream is one of those small tasks medieval villagers rely on to ease the mind. Simple enough to do without thought, steady enough to anchor scattered nerves. A few steps away, you notice two young women washing vegetables. A bundle of leeks and 3 particularly stubborn carrots still clotted with dirt. They chat softly, voices rising and falling with the current. Said he'd fix the roof before the rain, but he's still in the square buying gossip instead of nails. I told you he forgets everything unless you put it directly into his hands. You smile faintly. Conversations like this ripple through the village as naturally as the stream itself. Closer to the bend, an older man kneels beside a small basin he's carved directly into the bank. A feature villagers claim is older than any living person. Here, he uses it to soak a strip of leather, pressing it under with his thumb to soften it before shaping it into a strap or belt. As you watch him work, he mutters an old saying, "Leather knows the weather better than the sky does." You glance toward the horizon. He might be right. The leather already feels more pliable than usual. Further down, 2 girls collect smooth stones from the shallow water, sorting them into piles. Their mother stands nearby, explaining which ones make the best weights for weaving. The girls listen intently, taking their mission far more seriously than you expected. Childhood here may be brief, but its moments still shine brightly. Once your cloth is clean, you wring each piece carefully, twisting until the water drips in small, steady lines. You lay them across a sun-warmed rock where the last of the day's light still touches the surface. They won't dry completely before the storm, but they'll dry enough. Next comes your real task, cleaning the tools you use for flax and gathering. You place your small knife and linen-wrapped sickle onto the stone beside you, rinse each blade gently, and rub them with the smooth river sand that villagers have used for generations. It polishes metal clean without scratching. The blades gleam subtly under the dimming sky. As you work, a sudden splash draws your attention. A young boy stands ankle-deep in the water, frantically chasing a runaway gourd that slipped from his hands. It bobs just out of reach as he lunges for it again, sending droplets flying. His sister, sitting on the bank, dissolves into laughter. Grab it before it goes to the mill, she teases. He finally catches it and holds it aloft triumphantly, dripping and embarrassed. You grin. Moments like these stitch together the fabric of daily life, small, harmless mishaps that become stories retold at supper. You gather your finished tools, wrapping them neatly. The sky overhead has shifted again, darkening now, the clouds thick and undeniable. A chill slips into the breeze. It's time. You rise from the stream, sling your rope and cloth over your shoulder, and look back one last time. The villagers still lingering here begin packing up their items. The stream continues its quiet murmur, indifferent to the approaching storm. You head toward home at a brisk pace, feeling the first hint of moisture in the air. There's still another task waiting before nightfall. You hurry along the narrow path leading back toward the village, your tools wrapped neatly in linen, the rope coiled over your shoulder. With every step the wind grows a little cooler, a little more insistent. It brushes against your cheeks in quick, sharp strokes, carrying with it the metallic scent that always comes before rain. The storm is close now, so close the air feels heavy, as if the sky itself is lowering toward the earth. As you reach the first cottage on the lane, you see signs that everyone else feels it too. A woman rushes to bring in her drying herbs, gathering them into her apron with hurried motions. Two boys scramble to close the shutters of their home, arguing about who's moving too slowly. A dog trots anxiously along the road, ears pinned back, sensing the shift better than any human. There's still one more task you need to finish before the weather breaks, securing your own home and hearth. You turn down the small path that leads to your cottage and immediately notice your neighbour struggling with a loose shutter. The wood rattles noisily as each gust hits it, threatening to tear free entirely. You jog over, dropping your bundle by the door. "Need a hand?" you call out. She nods, pressing her shoulder against the frame to hold it steady. "The peg's worn down," she grunts, "and the wind's trying to steal the whole thing." You wedge your fingers into the joint, repositioning the shutter until the hinge aligns properly. Then, using a spare wooden peg she hands you, you hammer it into place with the heel of your palm and a few swift taps from a flat stone. The shutter groans but finally holds. Your neighbour lets out a relieved sigh. "Thank you," she says. "A storm always tests our houses first." "And our nerves," you add with a smile. She laughs, wiping her brow, then darts back inside. You pick up your bundle and head toward your own door. Inside the cottage, the dim light feels strangely comforting, as though the walls themselves have drawn closer to protect you. You place your tools on the bench and cross the room to check the small shutter that faces the western edge of the village, the direction storms usually approach from. The hinge creaks as you test its strength, but it holds firm. Still, you slide the wooden bar across the frame just in case. Next comes the hearth. You kneel on the packed earth floor and check the firewood you stacked earlier. The pieces are dry, tightly bound, and ready for the evening. You rearrange a few logs, stacking them so they'll catch quickly when you return to start the fire. A low rumble rolls across the sky. Not thunder, not yet, but the kind of distant growl that warns thunder is preparing its voice. You move faster now. You grab your small stool and pull it closer to the door as you step outside again. The sky's a quilt of heavy clouds now, layered grey upon grey. The last thin beams of sunlight struggle through, painting the earth in eerie streaks of gold. You lift the small bundles of flax you tied earlier and hang them securely beneath the sheltered side of your eaves. While you work, a small commotion catches your attention near the far end of the lane. A group of chickens squawk and scatter as the Reeves dog bolts after them, its excitement completely at odds with the rising tension in the air. Behind the dog, the Reeve himself shouts in exasperation, waving his arms in a hopeless attempt to restore order. Storm's coming and he decides now is the time to chase poultry. Someone shouts from a doorway. You laugh, shaking your head. Chaos always chooses the least convenient moment. The dog eventually retreats, tail wagging, as the chickens resume their indignant clucking. The reeve catches your eye, shrugging helplessly. "Some days," he mutters, "I think the animals understand storms better than people." You nod in agreement before returning to your own tasks. A few final checks. The latch on the door, the small basket of apples taken inside, the herbs tucked safely away from moisture. Everything is in order. Then, just as you step inside and pull the door closed behind you, a single raindrop taps against the wooden shutter. Then another. Then 3 more in quick succession. You hold your breath for a moment as the pattern builds, a soft patter at first, then a steady drumming. The storm has arrived. Inside the cottage, the world feels smaller, quieter, wrapped in the sound of rain against wood and thatch. You sit on your stool by the hearth, letting the rhythm settle into your chest. Outside, wind whistles through the cracks between cottages. Somewhere close by, a shutter slams, followed by muffled voices. But here, in your small space, everything feels contained, protected. You take a deep breath, feeling the warmth of the enclosed air and the faint scent of herbs stored above your head. The storm may have come, but your work, careful, deliberate, and rooted in centuries of habit, has prepared you well. And so you sit, listening to the rain, waiting for the right moment to begin the evening fire. The storm doesn't pass quickly. It settles over the village like a great brooding animal, patient, heavy, unyielding. Rain thuds against the shutters in steady waves, sometimes soft, sometimes fierce, always insistent. You sit for a few minutes on your small stool, listening to the rhythm. There's something comforting in it, almost hypnotic, as though the world outside has been reduced to one simple message: stay in, do home tasks, breathe. And so you rise, stretching your back slightly, ready to shift into the kind of work that the fields can't touch and the weather can't interrupt. Deep inside the cottage labour that medieval life depends on. The first thing you do is tend the fire. You crouch near the hearth, scooping a handful of dry kindling from the basket you filled days ago. You arrange the pieces carefully, thin sticks first, then thicker ones on top, forming a small, welcoming structure for the flame to climb. You strike a spark with flint and steel. It catches slowly, timidly, before blooming into a gentle tongue of fire that begins warming the room, casting soft orange light across the walls. The temperature rises just enough to take the chill out of the air. Rain outside, fire inside. There's a rhythm in that contrast too. With the hearth alive again, you retrieve your indoor tasks. The bundle of wool, your small knife, the spindle you promised to repair, the half-finished rope you've been braiding for weeks, the fabric scraps saved from older garments. A medieval cottage becomes a workshop on stormy afternoons, each corner carrying a different craft waiting patiently for attention. You begin with the spindle. The woman you spoke to earlier will want it back soon, especially with colder nights approaching. You examine the broken shaft, run your thumb across the split, then shave a fresh length of wood using smooth, deliberate strokes. The shavings curl like pale ribbons onto the floor. You fit the whirl into place, widen the notch slightly, and test the balance. Perfect. It spins true. Outside, wind whistles along the roofline, sending a few loose bits of thatch fluttering. You make a mental note to check it after the storm. Next, you take out your wool, cleaned and carded earlier in the week, and settle into a comfortable position near the fire. You begin spinning it between your fingers, twisting the fibres with practiced ease, watching them lengthen into thread. The motion is slow, repetitive, meditative. the kind of movement that quiets the mind. You let your thoughts drift freely as the spindle twirls in your hand. Sometimes it amazes you how much of medieval life happens in silence. Fixing, spinning, mending, arranging, crafting, all in rhythms as ancient as the land itself. Outside the cottage, people might gossip, argue, laugh and barter, but inside the work is gentler, steadier, quieter. A memory surfaces, last winter's long stretch of storms, when you and half the village spent evenings bundled near, hearths, spinning wool while sharing small stories to keep the dark at bay. Someone joked that the sound of 10 spindles turning at once could lull a person into sleep better than any lullaby. You smile at the memory. There was truth in it. The fire pops softly, sending a small ember rolling forward. You brush it back with the fire iron, careful and precise, then continue spinning. Your fingers follow the motion automatically now. Pinch, twist, draw, wind. Legs stretched out, shoulders relaxed, breath steady. When the wool basket empties, you switch tasks. You retrieve a tunic from the peg near the door, an older one worn at the elbows and fraying at the hem. You thread a bone needle with fresh spun wool and begin stitching. Slow, even stitches. Medieval repairs must be sturdy more than elegant. The thread pulls tight, securing old cloth with new fibre. You hum softly as you work. You pause midway through mending when you hear a familiar knock. 2 taps, then 1. The pattern belongs to your neighbour. You open the door to find her wrapped in a shawl, holding a small basket. "Trade?" she asks. Storms make people restless, so they trade to pass the time. She offers you a handful of dried mushrooms, thin, earthy, perfect for stews. In return, you hand her the spindle you repaired earlier. She tests its spin in the doorway, nods approvingly, then holds up the mushrooms. "A fair swap," she says. A gust of wind nearly pulls the door from her hand, so she steps back quickly. "I'll leave you to it. Storm's growing teeth." You smile and close the door gently, returning to your stool. The mushrooms go into your pantry. The tunic goes back onto your lap. The fire flickers across its surface like warm embroidery. Hours pass slowly, marked only by the fire's crackles and the rain's drumming. You mend the hem, reinforce the shoulder, patch a small tear near the collar. Each repair feels like giving the tunic another season of life. Outside, the storm deepens. Inside, the cottage becomes the centre of your world. Softly lit, warm, safe, filled with the quiet sound of meaningful work. And for the first time today, you let your shoulders ease. There's comfort in this domestic rhythm, comfort in knowing that even when the world outside grows harsh, the home still gives you space to breathe and create. The storm continues its steady assault on the cottage, each burst of wind rattling the shutters with a hollow wooden groan. But inside, the fire holds its warm ground, crackling with small, steady pops. You shift slightly on your stool, adjusting the tunic in your lap as the dim light glints off the bone needle between your fingers. The rhythm of stitching has settled into you so completely that you barely notice the transition from one repair to the next. Once the tunic's hem is finished, you set it aside and reach for the rope you've been braiding. Stormy afternoons are perfect for rope work. No dust blowing into the fibres, no distractions from passers-by, no competing tasks calling you back outside. You unwind the coil, examining where you're left off. 3 strands, twisted evenly. The fibres feel rough against your fingertips, warm from their closeness to the hearth. You begin braiding again, pulling each section tight with a satisfying firmness. Rope in a medieval household is never idle for long. It ties bundles of herbs, supports fences, secures doors, fastens tools to belts, guides animals, and sometimes even binds thatch into obedient lines. A well-made rope is worth its weight in silver on certain days. You feel a small spark of pride as the braid grows beneath your hands. When the rope segment reaches a useful length, you fold it neatly and place it beside your repaired tunic. The cottage feels richer somehow, fuller with finished work. Medieval life rarely gives opportunities for stillness, but when storms force you inside, you reclaim the kind of productivity that doesn't bruise the body. You stand and stretch, rolling your shoulders slowly. The fire has warmed the air enough now that your breath no longer fogs in front of you. You cross the cottage and lift a small wooden lid covering your storage nook. Inside sits a small tangle of household items awaiting attention. A cracked wooden spoon, a dull knife, a loose pot handle. You pull the knife first. Sharpening requires its own soft focus. You take the small whetstone from its cloth wrapping, sprinkle a few drops of water from your gourd, and begin sliding the blade across its surface. Slow, even strokes. Sparks don't fly the way they do at the blacksmith's forge. This is gentler, quieter, but no less important. You test the edge with your thumb, not against the sharp side, but across the grain, and nod. Better. The rain intensifies for a moment, hammering so loudly against the roof that you pause, eyes lifted toward the sound. The cottage holds firm. You listen, reassured. Nothing leaks, nothing shifts. The storm may rage, but the home you maintain so carefully withstands it. The cracked spoon comes next. You heat a thin rivulet of resin near the fire until it softens, then press it carefully into the crack with the tip of your knife. When the resin cools, it binds the wood like a tiny healed wound. You rub your thumb along the surface. It feels smooth again, strong enough to stir a pot without fear of snapping. Outside, a voice calls faintly through the storm. A neighbour shouting to someone unseen, probably chasing an animal back indoors. Their words blur into the wind, only the urgency clear. You smile sympathetically. Animals don't care about storms. They wander, they bolt, they follow instincts older than any cottage wall. Time slips as you continue through small chores, straightening the shelves, sweeping stray fibres from the floor, tightening the twine around the herb bundles drying overhead. The cottage glows warmly now, its corners softened by firelight. Shadows dance on the walls in slow arcs each time the flames shift. Eventually you sit again, drawing a small wooden box from beneath the bench. Inside lie the finer tasks, the ones requiring good light and patience. You retrieve a handful of dried apple slices and begin threading them onto a long string for storage. They'll hang near the rafters where smoke and warmth keep them dry. You pierce each slice carefully, sliding them along the thread until you have a neat, fragrant chain. Their sweet, faint scent fills the air. A memory surfaces. Last winter, when one of these apple strings broke and spilled fruit across the floor. A neighbour's child gathered them like treasure, insisting that no apple should ever be lonely. You smile at the thought, tying this new string securely to avoid such a fate again. When the rain softens slightly, you take a moment to warm your hands near the fire. You feel the gentle ache in your fingers, the kind that comes from meaningful use rather than strain. Indoor work never stops entirely, but it asks less of your muscles and more of your mind. It's the work that keeps the home whole, everything protected, everything ready. The storm flares once more, wind sweeping against the shutters in a prolonged, mournful moan. But this time, the sound doesn't unsettle you. You've done what you can. Your cottage is prepared, your stores secure, your tools repaired, your clothing mended. The world outside may be soaked and restless, but inside you've created a small island of order. You sit back on your stool, listening to the fire breathe. The storm can do what it will. You have done your part. When the storm finally begins to ease, just slightly, just enough for the rhythm of rain to steady instead of thrash. You rise from your stool and stretch your legs. The cottage feels warm now, lived in, gently humming with the quiet pride of good work finished. But the day isn't over. Medieval evenings are full of their own tasks, rituals, and small comforts, and the waning storm creates the perfect transition into that next rhythm. You fetch your cloak from its peg by the door. It's still damp from earlier, but the fabric has warmed near the hearth, softening the stiffness. You wrap it loosely around your shoulders and open the cottage door just a crack. The world outside feels transformed. The air carries that unmistakable after-rain scent, earthy, clean, almost metallic. The lane glistens in the fading light, puddles forming in shallow dips where boots will surely splash tomorrow. Mist rises in gentle spirals from the thatched roofs. Everything feels hushed, as if the entire village is catching its breath. But above all, the light has changed. The clouds are breaking in uneven strips, revealing a narrow band of pale evening sky. The sun, although nearly gone, paints the world in a muted gold that reflects off wet surfaces like liquid metal. You step outside and let the cool air wash over your face. After hours of indoor labour, the freshness feels like a small blessing. And it is time for the evening meal. Your stomach, patient but persistent, gives a gentle twist of reminder. So you gather the small basket of ingredients you've prepared throughout the day. The dried mushrooms from your neighbour, the turnips you collected earlier, a few flakes of salted fish, and a handful of herbs. Simple things, humble things, but enough for a proper evening dish. You return to the hearth and set your pot above the fire. The steam from the still wet air outside clings to your skin, mingling with the warmth rising from the hearthstones. You drop the mushrooms into warm water first to soften them. Their earthy aroma fills the room almost instantly. Next, you peel the turnips, the blade sliding easily now that you sharpened it earlier, and slice them into quiet, rhythmic crescents. They hiss softly as they meet the hot water. Evening meals in a medieval cottage are less about flavour and more about warmth and steadiness. Yet even in such simplicity there's comfort. The scent of simmering vegetables, the low crackling of the fire, the faint sweetness of dried apple slices you strung earlier, still perfuming the air above your head. As the stew begins to bubble, you add the salted fish, breaking it apart with the back of your spoon. Its sharp brininess mellows in the heat, blending into the pot with surprising smoothness. A pinch of herbs, thyme and a bit of rosemary turns the mixture fragrant, almost festive. You stir slowly, letting your mind wander the way it always does during evening cooking. Through the shutter slats, you hear faint activity from the lane. Life is stirring again now that the storm has loosened its grip. Someone calls to a neighbour asking if their chicken survived the downpour. A dog barks twice, perhaps chasing shadows more than actual threats. You even catch the muffled laugh of someone slipping ankle deep into a new puddle. The pot simmers contentedly. You take a seat on your stool, continuing to stir gently. Suddenly a memory rises, one of those small, quirky bits of village lore. You recall someone telling you that long ago villagers believed that rainwater caught right after a storm's peak could heal cracked skin. It was probably just soft water being easier on the hands, but the story stuck with you anyway. Little tales like that pass through generations not because they're useful, but because they make hard lives feel touched with a tiny spark of wonder. The stew thickens as you reflect. You taste a small spoonful. The turnips have softened perfectly, the mushrooms rich and grounding. You add a bit of the honey ointment you traded for earlier. Not enough for sweetness, just a dot to smooth the edges of the broth. A trick someone taught you years ago. A secret you keep quietly. You ladle the stew into your wooden bowl and settle near the fire. The warmth radiates through you with the first bite, calming muscles you didn't realize were still tense. Outside, the rain has thinned into a gentle patter, soft, polite, almost apologetic after its earlier rage. This is the moment medieval villagers work toward all day. A hot meal, 4 walls, a bit of quiet, and the knowledge that even if tomorrow brings new burdens, tonight is warm and safe. As you eat, you feel yourself settling into a deeper calm. The fire flickers, the storm sighs, the stew warms you from throat to chest to belly, easing the long ache of the day. Evening has begun, and the village slowly and quietly begins to breathe again. You finish the last spoonful slowly, savouring the warmth as it settles deep into your core. Outside, the storm has weakened to a shy drizzle, the kind that whispers rather than drums. The light slipping through the shutters has shifted from gold to a muted blue-grey, the unmistakable glow of early evening. It's the hour when the village changes shape again, when voices soften, when chores lighten, and when people drift into the gentle rituals that carry them toward night. You set your empty bowl on the small table by the hearth and take a moment simply to listen. The cottage gives off a soft, steady crackle from the fire. A gentle draught hums through the wall. The rope you finished braiding earlier hangs neatly beside the door, swaying ever so slightly with the shifting air. Then you hear it, faint footsteps on the lane, followed by the familiar murmur of neighbours calling evening greetings. No matter how exhausting the day, this is when people begin to re-emerge, reconnecting after the storm's forced isolation. You pull your cloak around your shoulders, open the door and step outside into the cool, washed air. The world feels rinsed clean. The puddles glisten like tiny mirrors. The thatched roofs drip rhythmically. The sky, though still cloudy, has broken just enough to reveal streaks of pale lavender. The smell of wet earth rises around you, rich and comforting. You breathe it in deeply. A few villagers are already gathered beneath a large oak near the centre of the lane, the same tree that sheltered gossip and laughter earlier in the day. Now it shelters something quieter, that tender, winding down kind of conversation that comes only after shared labour and shared weather. You join them, nodding to each familiar face. Someone shifts to make space for you on a low wooden bench. "You survived the storm," one man says with a grin. "Barely," you reply, playing along. A woman nearby chuckles. At least it wasn't like last winter, when the wind peeled half the south roof off the mill and sent the shingles flying into old Garen's cabbage patch. The group breaks into laughter at the memory, particularly the part where old Garen insisted the wind had singled him out personally, taking offence at his refusal to share his late autumn ale. Someone adds, "He still thinks weather has opinions." These moments, shared humour, shared history, soften the edges of village life more than any stew or fire ever could. A child approaches the group, clutching something in both hands. When she gets close enough, you see it is a little clay figure, lumpy, crooked, clearly shaped by small fingers. She holds it out proudly. "It's a sheep," she declares. The resemblance is vague at best, but you nod solemnly. "A very fine sheep." She beams, then runs off to show the next neighbour. The adults exchange smiles. In a medieval village, even the smallest creative act becomes a point of communal warmth. You settle into the conversation as the dusk deepens. People swap small stories of how the storm affected their homes, whose dog panicked, whose herbs needed rescuing, whose tinder stayed blessedly dry. One man boasts that he patched his roof just in time. Another mutters that he'll be patching his for the next 2 weeks. The gentle rivalry feels familiar, comforting. A woman beside you unwraps a bit of cloth to offer small bites of dried fruit. You take a piece and thank her. She shrugs lightly. The storm pours just long enough to check on each other. Seems fair to share. Evening gatherings like this serve an important role. They close the emotional distance created by long labour. You feel your mind settling, your shoulders loosening, the small tightness in your chest finally dissolving into the soft quiet of neighbourly presence. As the sky darkens further, a few villagers begin drifting back toward their cottages. You take the hint, rising slowly from the bench. The air has grown cooler again, with a hint of night's deeper chill creeping in. You say your goodbyes and make your way home. Inside, the cottage welcomes you with a gentle glow. You close the door against the cooling breeze and hang your cloak by the hearth. The fire is still alive, though lower now, flickering in slow, drowsy arcs. You add one small log, not enough to roar, just enough to carry you through your evening routines. You gather the chain of apple slices you finished earlier and hang it carefully near the rafters. Then you check your stores again. The mushrooms, the apples, the flax bundles drying near the wall, the newly mended tunic folded neatly on a shelf. Everything is where it should be. Everything feels in order. The room dims as the last natural light fades. You sit on your stool once more, letting the quiet embrace you. The storm has passed, evening has settled, and your home, warm, orderly, safe, holds you gently between the end of one long day and the beginning of night. For a moment, you simply breathe. Slow, easy, content. Because this soft quiet after a storm, is one of the purest comforts a medieval villager ever knows. Night is gathering at the edges of the village now, settling into the rooftops like a soft, dark shawl. You feel it before you see it, the way the air grows still, the way colours lose their sharpness, the way the quiet deepens in a way that feels almost reverent. Evening in a medieval village isn't just a time of day, it's a transition, a turning inward, a slow unwinding after hours defined by labour and weather and human noise. Your cottage sits warm behind you, firelight flickering across the walls, but something in the cool air draws you outside again. Not far, not for long, just enough to stretch your legs and catch the last breaths of twilight before darkness claims the lanes. You step onto the small path in front of your home and walk slowly toward the central well. The puddles left behind by the storm reflect the first faint stars overhead, tiny points of light trembling in the rippling water. The smell of rain still lingers, fresh, earthy, touched with a faint smoke drifting from chimneys where evening fires burn low. The village looks softer at this hour. The rough edges blur. The fences, patched and crooked in daylight, become gentle silhouettes. The cottages glow from within as families settle into their nighttime rituals. Warm light spills through shutter slats in thin lines, touching the damp ground like golden threads. In the distance, someone hums a lullaby. The notes carry lightly on the cool air, simple, steady, comforting. It weaves through the village like a small blessing. You drift toward the well and lean your hands lightly on the stone rim. The water inside reflects the dimming sky, turning deeper and deeper blue. You lift the bucket slightly, testing its weight, hearing the familiar slosh inside. It's instinctive, part of your nightly routine, even if you don't strictly need more water tonight. Routine is its own comfort. A soft scuff of footsteps draws your attention. Old Garin approaches, stooped but steady, his lantern swinging gently at his side. The glow reveals the deep lines etched into his face, each one carved by years of storms, harvests, and an astonishing catalogue of dramatic opinions. "Evening walk?" he asks. "Just a short one," you say. He grunts approvingly, leaning against his walking stick. Good to stretch before the cold settles in. Then, in a conspiratorial whisper, he adds, "Storm blew half the thatch off the mill roof, you know." You raise an eyebrow. "Half? Well, some. A corner, a bit of a corner." He waves his free hand dismissively. "But it'll make for a fine story by tomorrow." You laugh softly. Garen's tendency to enlarge events is practically a village tradition at this point. You wonder how many stories of his will outlive him. Likely more than he'd ever expect. He continues down the lane, lantern bobbing like a small wandering star. You watch until the glow disappears behind a cottage wall. You stroll a little farther, passing the long stretch of common ground where chickens often roam in the mornings. Now they're tucked safely inside coops, their restless clucks replaced by the occasional soft rustle of settling feathers. You pause near the wooden enclosure, listening to one last sleepy cluck. Even the animals feel the rhythm of evening. A faint breeze rises, carrying the quiet sound of two women chatting near their doorway. Their voices are soft but animated, discussing the next washing day, debating whose bread turned out misshapen, wondering aloud whether the steward's next visit will bring more trouble than usual. Their silhouettes move gently behind the warped window pane. Even gossip grows calmer at night, less sharp, less urgent, more reflective. You continue walking until you reach the small slope overlooking the fields. The storm has left the soil dark and rich, almost black in the waning light. The last threads of sunset burn low on the horizon, muted by leftover clouds but still beautiful. You stand there for a moment, breathing in the cool air, letting it fill you with a quiet clarity. A memory drifts back to you, one of those small but peculiar tidbits older villagers swear by. Someone once insisted that standing outside at twilight facing the fields lets the day leave your bones. You don't know if it's true, but standing here now, letting the chill settle gently over your skin, you understand why the idea survived. There's something soothing about this moment, something cleansing in watching the last light fade across the land you spent the day working. Eventually you turn back toward the village. Night deepens, shadows stretch farther, lanterns flicker behind closed shutters. The world becomes a patchwork of warm lights and soft darkness. You walk slowly, feeling the shift inside yourself, a loosening of the day's tightness, the beginnings of fatigue in your bones, and the gentle anticipation of rest. Home is waiting, warmth is waiting, and the night, calm and watchful, begins to settle around the village like a protective cloak. You make your way back toward your cottage, letting the soft darkness wrap around you like an old familiar blanket. The night has fully arrived now, not the dense, absolute darkness of deep winter, but a gentler kind, softened by the lingering dampness in the air and the warm glow leaking from shuttered windows. Each cottage seems to hold its own tiny universe of flickering firelight, muted voices and quiet movement. As you walk, your boots squish lightly in the damp earth, leaving dark impressions that will dry by morning. The storm has rinsed the village clean, leaving everything smelling fresh. Wood, soil, thatch, even the cool stones lining the lane. Somewhere nearby, a horse shifts in its stall with a soft snort, followed by the slow scrape of hooves against straw. A dog barks once, then falls silent again. The night is still settling, but it's already beginning to hum with the sounds of households, winding down. As you pass one cottage, you see a silhouette through the shutter slats. A woman brushing her daughter's hair by firelight. The child leans sleepily against her mother's knee, head nodding with each gentle stroke. A lullaby hums from the room, barely audible but warm as beeswax. You pause, not to intrude, but simply to appreciate the softness of the moment before continuing on. At another doorway, Two men sit on low stools repairing fishing nets by lantern glow. Their hands move quickly despite the dim light, twisting cords and tying knots with a speed born from years of practice. One of them looks up as you approach. "Evening," he calls quietly. "Good evening," you reply. He nods toward the sky. "Storm might have muddied the riverbank. We'll see tomorrow." You smile sympathetically. Rain always rearranges the world, sometimes helpfully, sometimes not. You wish them luck and continue walking. Farther down the lane, you find old Marta kneeling beside a small wooden trough, tossing handfuls of grain toward her goats. They nuzzle her hands affectionately, their soft bleats rising like gentle questions. Marta strokes one of them behind the ears and glances up at you. "They don't like storms," she says, shaking her head. "But feed them now, and they'll sleep sound." Her goats indeed look calmer in the lantern light, their eyes reflecting small sparks of gold. You give her a small wave, then carry on. By the time you reach your cottage door, your shoulders have loosened, your thoughts have softened, and the day that once clung to your bones now feels lighter, quieter. You step inside, closing the door behind you with a soft thud. The familiar scent of your home, herbs, wool, warm wood, greets you instantly. The fire has burned low, its glow deeper and steadier now. You kneel beside the hearth, adding a modest piece of wood. Not too large. You don't need a roaring fire, just enough warmth to protect against the cool night air that creeps through the cottage walls. The flames respond slowly, licking upward in graceful orange curls. You fetch your cup and pour a bit of warm water mixed with the last spoon of honey ointment, a trick you keep to yourself. It soothes your throat and settles your breath. You sit on your stool, holding the cup between your palms, letting the warmth seep into your fingers. This is your favourite part of the day, the hour when everything becomes soft edges and quiet thoughts. The storm may have passed, but the steady hum of rain still lingers in the air, as if the sky can't quite decide whether it wants to rest or keep whispering to the earth. You listen to it, letting the sound guide your breathing, slow, even, peaceful. Your thoughts drift to the villagers you saw tonight, the mother brushing her child's hair, the men repairing nets, Marta whispering to her goats. These tiny scenes form the true heart of the village, not the fields, not the marketplace, not the labour or the weather, but the human moments that stitch one day gently into the next. You lift your cup to your lips, taking a slow sip. The warmth spreads through your chest. Your eyelids grow heavy, not with exhaustion, but with a quiet, settled calm. You tidy your small workspace one last time, folding the rope neatly, placing the sharpened knife in its place, hanging the dried apple chain safely above the hearth. Then you turn toward your bedding, a simple mattress stuffed with straw, covered with a worn but comforting wool blanket. You stand at its edge for a moment, listening to the fire's soft breathing. The world outside continues its gentle shift toward night. Your day's work is behind you, and the path to rest waits ahead. With one last deep breath, you settle beside the hearth's glow. The night embraces the village, and you let yourself sink gently into it. Night has fully settled over the village now, quiet and complete, wrapping the world in a darkness so gentle it feels like a soft wool cloak laid across your shoulders. You lie on your straw-stuffed mattress for a moment, watching the glow of the hearth flicker across the ceiling beams. The fire pulses in slow breaths, sending waves of orange light dancing up the walls before retreating back into the shadows. It's warm, safe, familiar, but sleep doesn't come yet, not right away. Medieval villagers rarely fall asleep the moment they lie down. There are small things to do first, small rituals that mark the passage from waking world to dreams. So after a few breaths, You rise again, stretching your legs and rubbing the day's weariness from your eyes. The first task is simple: bank the fire. You kneel beside the hearth, gathering the glowing embers with your poker and sweeping them together into a snug little mound. You lay a few pieces of ash over them, just enough to slow their burn but not smother them entirely. Banked properly, the fire will sleep through the night and still offer a warm heart of embers come morning, ready to spark to life again with nothing more than a breath and a bit of dry kindling. A tiny domestic miracle. The room dims slightly as you finish. The fire's glow becomes calmer, deeper, more private. You move next to the small wooden table where your candle sits. Its wick is nearly consumed, just enough wax left to guide you through the last evening tasks. You take your knife and trim the burnt wick, then relight it from the hearth's embers. The flame flares softly, casting thin shadows across the table. By this warm, flickering light, you check your tools one last time. Your knife is sharp. Your rope is neatly coiled. The wool thread you spun earlier is wound tight around its spindle. Everything sits exactly where it should, ready for the next day's work. You know from experience that mornings run more smoothly when evenings end with intention.